My father shoved my 7-year-old daughter onto the hardwood floor on Christmas Eve. The sound of her small body hitting the ground silenced the entire dinner party. He stood over her face, red with rage, and pointed a shaking finger at her face. "That seat is for my real grandchild," he spat. "Not for some charity case you picked up to play house." My mother sipped her wine. My brother laughed. My wife started to lunge forward, but I held her back. They expected me to scream. They expected me to beg for their acceptance. Instead, I calmly pulled out my phone and tapped the screen 3 times. By the time my father woke up the next morning, he did not own the chair he sat in, the car in his driveway, or the house we were standing in. Before we continue this story of absolute destruction, please hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your worth. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Driving up the winding driveway to my parents' estate in Connecticut always felt like entering a movie set. Everything looked perfect from a distance. The 3-story colonial house was draped in tasteful white lights. The snow on the manicured lawn was untouched. A silver Bentley and a black Mercedes were parked prominently in the circular driveway, positioned specifically so that neighbors could see the emblems. To the outside world, this was the home of Thomas Sterling, the successful real estate mogul. But as I parked my dented 2014 Volvo station wagon off to the side, I saw what no one else did. I saw a house that had been refinanced 3 times. I saw luxury cars that were leased, not owned. And I knew for a fact that the repossession order for that silver Bentley had been printed at my office just 2 hours ago. My wife Vanessa reached over and squeezed my hand. Her touch was the only real warmth in this frozen landscape. She looked beautiful in her simple wool coat, but I could feel the tension radiating off her. She was a federal judge, a woman who commanded respect from attorneys and criminals alike, yet here in this zip code, my family treated her like invisible help. "Ready for this?" she whispered. I nodded. "Just remember the plan. We do not engage. We let them dig their own graves." In the back seat, my daughter Maya was bouncing with excitement. She was 7, innocent, and completely unaware that her grandfather viewed her as a genetic error. She adjusted her pink earmuffs and grabbed the small bag of gifts we had brought. "Daddy, look at the big tree in the window," she squealed. We stepped out into the biting cold. Before we could even reach the front steps, the heavy oak door swung open. My brother Preston leaned against the frame, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He was wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than my car, and on his wrist sat a gold Patek Philippe watch. I glanced at the watch and almost laughed. The second hand was ticking, not sweeping. It was a fake, just like him. "Well, look who decided to show up," Preston sneered, blowing smoke in our direction. "I thought you might have gotten lost, or maybe that old piece of junk finally broke down on the highway. You know Uber Eats is hiring if you need cash for a new transmission." I ignored him and lifted Maya up the steps. "Hi, Uncle Preston," she chirped, holding out her hand. Preston did not take it. He looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her coat. It was a perfectly good jacket from Target, warm and practical. Preston scoffed. "Cute look," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Is the Salvation Army having a clearance sale? My son Connor wouldn't be caught dead in polyester." Maya lowered her hand, confused. I felt Vanessa stiffen beside me, but I shot her a look. "Not yet. We are happy to see you too, Preston," I said, my voice flat. We pushed past him into the foyer. The heat inside was suffocating, smelling of expensive pine candles and pretension. My father Thomas was standing by the grand staircase. He was holding court with a glass of scotch in his hand. When he saw us, his smile vanished instantly. He walked right past me. He walked right past Vanessa without even a nod. He knelt down, but not to greet Maya. He knelt to tie the shoe of Preston's son Connor, who was sitting on the stairs playing a video game. "There is my champion, Thomas," boomed his voice full of performative pride. "Granddad got you something special. It is in the garage. Real leather seats." Maya took a small step forward. "Merry Christmas, Grandpa," she said softly. Thomas stood up, dusting off his knees. He looked at Maya for a split second, his expression blank, as if he was looking at a piece of furniture he didn't order. "You are late," he grunted, looking at me. "Dinner is in 10 minutes. Try not to track mud on the Persian rugs." "They cost more than your annual salary." He turned his back on us and walked toward the living room. Vanessa took a deep breath. I could hear her counting to 10. We walked into the living room to place our gifts under the tree. The disparity was comical. The base of the tree was overflowing with massive boxes wrapped in gold foil, all tagged for Connor or Preston. It looked like a showroom floor. I placed our 3 modest gift bags near the back. They contained rare books and a donation certificate in the family name things of actual value. Thomas watched me from his armchair. "That is it?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "That is your contribution this year?" "A few paper bags. We are on a budget, Dad," I said, playing my part perfectly. "Freelance work has been slow." Thomas chuckled, shaking his head. He looked at his drinking buddies who had gathered for the pre-dinner cocktail. "I told him to go into real estate," Thomas said loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. But no, he wanted to be independent. Now look at him, 36 years old and brings paper bags to Christmas. The room erupted in polite, cruel laughter. I stood there, my face completely expressionless. I watched my father swirl his expensive scotch. I watched my brother check his fake watch. They thought they were kings of the world. They had no idea that the man standing in the worn-out boots, the son they were mocking, had just acquired the controlling stake in the bank that held all their loans. I checked my phone. 6:00 p.m. The system update would run at midnight. They had exactly 6 hours left of being rich. "Let's eat." My mother called out from the dining room. I took Maya's hand. The nightmare was just beginning, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was just waiting for the check to clear. The dining room was a theater of war disguised as a holiday celebration. My mother had set the table with her grandmother's Waterford crystal and sterling silver cutlery artifacts from a time when this family actually had liquid assets. Now they were just props used to intimidate anyone who dared to marry into the sterling name without a trust fund. The seating arrangement was not random. It was a calculated geographical map of my father's affection. Thomas sat at the head of the table, the king of his crumbling castle. To his immediate right sat my brother Preston. To his left sat Preston's wife, a woman who spent more time at the plastic surgeon than with her own child. Next to them sat Connor, my nephew, who was currently stabbing a bread roll with a steak knife, while my mother looked on with an indulgent smile. And then there was us. Vanessa and I were placed at the far end of the table near the kitchen swing door. It was the draftiest spot in the room, but the real insult was the chair count. There were 12 people in attendance, including the 2 distant cousins invited to fill space, but I counted only 11 dining chairs. "Where is Maya sitting?" Vanessa asked, her voice low but firm. My mother fluttered her hands nervously. "Oh, we thought the children could take turns, or perhaps Maya would prefer the kitchen island. It is much more fun in there, isn't it, sweetie? She has an iPad she can watch." Maya looked up at me, her big brown eyes wide with confusion. She was wearing her best velvet dress, the one she had picked out specifically to impress her grandfather. She did not want to watch an iPad in the kitchen. She wanted to be part of the family. "There is an empty chair right there," Maya said, pointing to the high-backed oak chair next to Thomas. The room went quiet. That chair was technically empty, but in the Sterling household, objects held more status than people. "That is an antique," Thomas said, not looking up from his soup. "It is French Restoration period. It is not for children with sticky hands." "But Connor is sitting on one," Maya pointed out innocently. Connor stuck his tongue out at her. "I am the heir," he jeered. "You are just the spare part." Preston chuckled into his wineglass. "Kid has a point, Ethan. Hierarchy is important. Teaches them their place early in life." I felt Vanessa's hand grip my thigh under the table. Her nails dug into my skin. I placed my hand over hers, signaling her to wait. Just a little longer. Maya, however, was 7 years old. She did not understand the complex socio-political warfare of my father's dining room. She just wanted to be close to the man she called Grandpa. In her mind, Christmas was about closeness. She saw the empty chair as an invitation. Before I could stop her, she walked the length of the long mahogany table. She moved with a tentative hope that broke my heart. She reached the head of the table and placed her small hand on the armrest of the empty chair next to Thomas. "Grandpa," she said softly, "I promise I won't be sticky." I washed my hands twice. "Can I please sit with you? I drew a picture of us, and I want to show you." Thomas stopped eating. He slowly lowered his silver spoon into the porcelain bowl with a clink that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. He turned his head slowly to look at her. For a moment, I thought he might show a shred of humanity. I thought that maybe Just maybe the spirit of the holiday or the undeniable cuteness of a child asking for love would pierce through his narcissism. I was wrong. Thomas looked at her hand touching the wood of his precious chair. His face turned a shade of violent purple. I told you, he roared. He did not just yell, he moved. His arm shot out in a violent sweeping motion, intending to knock her hand off the chair. But he was clumsy with rage and alcohol. His heavy forearm connected with Maya's shoulder. The force of the blow sent her spinning. She was small, light, and completely unprepared for violence from a family member. Her feet tangled in the thick Persian rug. She crashed onto the hardwood floor. Thud! The sound was sickening. It was the sound of bone hitting oak. Maya slid a few feet, coming to a stop near the buffet table. For a second, there was total silence. Then a low whimper started in her throat, escalating quickly into a terrified wail. Vanessa screamed. My wife scrambled out of her chair, knocking it over in her haste. She ran to our daughter, scooping her up into her arms, checking her head for injuries. Maya was shaking, burying her face in Vanessa's neck, sobbing uncontrollably. I stood up. I did not run. I stood up slowly, methodically, pushing my chair back without making a sound. My mother gasped, covering her mouth. Oh dear, she must have slipped. Thomas, you didn't mean to. He meant it, Vanessa hissed, glaring at them with eyes that could sentence a man to life in prison. He pushed her. Thomas stood up, slamming his napkin onto the table. He did not look apologetic. He looked indignant. He looked like the victim. Get her out, Thomas bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at my crying daughter. Get that noise out of my dining room. You pushed a 7-year-old, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried across the room. She touched the chair. Thomas shouted, spittle flying from his lips. I told her that seat is reserved for family, for the legacy. He looked at Connor, then at Preston, and finally at me with a look of pure disgust. You think you can just bring anyone in here and seat them at my table? Thomas sneered. You think I do not know? You think I am blind? Look at her, Ethan. Look at her hair. Look at her skin. She's not a sterling. The air in the room seemed to vanish. The racial subtext that had always been whispered in corners was now being screamed under the crystal chandelier. My bloodline is royal, Thomas declared, puffing out his chest. We trace our roots back to the founders of this state. My legacy is pure. That chair is for my grandson. It is for people who share my DNA. It is not for some mongrel you picked up to play house with. Mongrel? The word hung in the air, toxic and heavy. Preston looked down at his plate, suddenly finding the green beans very interesting. My mother poured herself more wine, her hand shaking so badly the bottle rattled against the glass. Vanessa stood up, holding Maya. She looked at me, waiting for me to destroy him. She knew I had a black belt in Krav Maga. She knew I could cross the room in 2 seconds and break his jaw before he could take another breath. But violence would be too easy. Violence would heal. A broken jaw sets in 6 weeks. I wanted to inflict an injury that would never heal. I wanted to take the only thing he actually loved. I walked around the table. I stopped 3 feet in front of him. Thomas flinched, raising his hands as if to block a punch. He expected the angry, emotional son he used to bully. He expected me to lose control. That is what he wanted. If I hit him, I was the villain. If I screamed, I was the unstable one. I did neither. I stood perfectly still. I locked eyes with him. I did not blink. I activated the part of my brain that I used in boardroom hostile takeovers. I analyzed him not as a father, but as a failing asset. I looked at the sweat on his forehead. I looked at the dilated capillaries in his nose from decades of expensive scotch. I looked at the fear hiding behind his arrogance. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The silence stretched. It became uncomfortable, then unbearable. The only sound was Maya's soft sobbing and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. 4 seconds, 5 seconds. I saw him start to crumble under the weight of the stair. He shifted his weight. He looked away, then looked back, trying to regain dominance. But I was a statue. I was a mirror reflecting his own ugliness back at him. 6 seconds, 7 seconds. I mentally visualized his balance sheet. I visualized the $12.4 million in debt. I visualized the lien on the house. I visualized the foreclosure notice that was currently sitting in a server at Vanguard Capital, waiting for my biometric authorization. 8 seconds, 9 seconds. He opened his mouth to speak, to fill the silence with more venom, but nothing came out. He was small, He was finite, and he was finished. 10 seconds. I broke eye contact. I did not say a word to him. I did not give him the satisfaction of a response. He was not worth a sentence. I turned to Vanessa. "Get the coats," I said. "We are leaving." "But the dinner," my mother stammered. "There is no dinner," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "And there is no family. Not anymore." I walked over to the table where Preston was sitting. He looked up, smirking, thinking the show was over. "Nice show, bro," Preston whispered. "But you are still walking out of here with nothing." I leaned down, bringing my face close to his ear. I spoke so only he could hear, but I made sure every syllable was precise. "Enjoy the house tonight, Preston. I suggest you pack a bag. The locks change at 8 a.m. I straightened up, walked over to my daughter, and took her from Vanessa's arms. I carried her toward the door, stepping over the threshold of the dining room without looking back. Behind me, I heard Thomas pouring another drink. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully defended his territory. He had no idea that I had just pressed the nuclear button in my mind. The countdown had begun. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind us, muting the sound of my mother's nervous laughter and my brother's jeering. The silence of the winter night rushed in to replace it. The wind was biting, whipping snow against our faces, but I did not feel the cold. I felt a different kind of heat, a burning clarity that started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. I carried Maya down the front steps. She had stopped crying, which was worse. She was silent, her small face buried in the crook of my neck, her breathing hitching every few seconds. She was in shock. A 7-year-old girl does not have the emotional tools to process why her grandfather would physically assault her. Vanessa walked beside me, her heels crunched on the frozen gravel. She was shaking not from the temperature, but from a rage so profound it made her hands tremble as she reached for the car door handle. We reached our old Volvo. It was covered in a thin layer of frost. It looked pathetic next to the gleaming silver Bentley Continental GT parked just 3 feet away. My father parked that Bentley at a 45-degree angle, taking up 2 spaces just to make sure no one missed it. It was his pride and joy. It was the symbol of his status. I strapped Maya into her booster seat. She looked at me with red, puffy eyes. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Is it because I am not a real Sterling? Is that why he pushed me?" My heart shattered, then instantly reformed into something harder than diamond. I smoothed her hair back. "No, baby," I said, my voice steady. "You are the only real thing in that house. Grandpa is just confused. But do not worry, I am going to fix it." "How?" she asked. "I am going to take away his toys," I said. I shut the back door. Vanessa was already in the passenger seat. She was staring straight ahead at the dashboard, her jaw clenched tight. "I cannot believe I let them speak to us like that," she said, her voice tight. "I am a federal judge, Ethan. I put dangerous men in prison every week. And I let your father push our daughter. I should have arrested him on the spot. I should have called the state troopers." "No," I said, climbing into the driver's seat and starting the engine. The old engine sputtered to life. Arresting him gives him a story. It gives him a chance to play the victim in court. He would love that. He would love the drama. I put the car in reverse, backing out of the shadow of the house. I looked up at the dining room window. I could see the warm glow of the chandelier. I could see the silhouettes of them raising their glasses. They were probably toasting to their victory. They were toasting to the purification of their dinner table. "So what do we do?" Vanessa asked, looking at me. "We just leave. We just let them win." I pulled the car to a stop at the end of the long driveway, right next to the stone gateposts that bore the name Sterling Manor in brass letters. I left the engine idling. The heater began to blow warm air into the cabin. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "We do not let them win," I said. "We end the game." I tapped the screen and dialed a number I had saved as Jason Legal. Jason was not just a lawyer. He was a shark I had hired away from the biggest firm in Wall Street to head the legal department of Vanguard Capital. He was the man I paid $700,000 a year to handle problems that required a scorched earth policy. He answered on the first ring, despite it being Christmas Eve. "Ethan," Jason said. His voice was crisp alert. "I assume this isn't a social call." "You assume correctly," I said. I engaged the speakerphone so Vanessa could hear. "I am sitting outside the collateral property for the Sterling Holdings debt package." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the sound of typing. "The Connecticut estate," Jason confirmed, "valued at $4.2 million, currently leveraged to 90%. We hold a senior debt note. What do you need? I looked at the house one last time. I looked at the Bentley. I remembered the sound of Maya's body hitting the floor. Execute clause 14. B, I said. The line went silent for a moment. Even Jason, a man who destroyed companies for breakfast, seemed to hesitate. Ethan Jason said slowly, Clause 14B is the nuclear option. It is the accelerated repayment clause, based on character default and material adverse change. If we trigger that, we are demanding full repayment of the $12 million loan immediately. They won't have the cash. I know, I said. That is the point. If they cannot pay within 24 hours, we move to immediate asset seizure. Jason continued, his voice taking on a professional rhythm. We freeze the corporate accounts. We freeze the personal accounts guaranteed by the firm. We place liens on all physical assets. This will bankrupt them by lunchtime tomorrow. Are you sure you want to do this on a holiday? I looked at Vanessa. She was watching me, her eyes wide. She realized for the first time that the man she married, the freelance consultant, who clipped coupons for groceries, was actually the one holding the axe. I am not just sure, Jason. I am mandating it. I want the papers filed electronically with the court in the next 10 minutes. Done, Jason said. And Jason, I added, I have one specific instruction regarding the physical assets. Name it. The silver Bentley Continental in the driveway. I said, license plate number King Tom. It is leased through the holding company we just acquired the debt from. I see it here, Jason said. Lease payments are 3 months behind. Technically, it is already in default. Good, I said. I do not want a warning letter. I do not want a grace period. I want a repossession team here tonight. Tonight, Jason asked. It is Christmas Eve, Ethan. Tow companies charge triple. Pay them quadruple, I said coldly. I want that car gone before he wakes up to open his presents. I want him to walk out tomorrow morning, expecting to go to the club and find an empty spot where his ego used to be. I want the tow truck to be loud. I want the neighbors to see the flashing lights. Understood, Jason said. I will make the call now. ETA for the repo team is 6 o'clock a.m. Anything else? Yes, I said. The house, what about it? Check the deed covenants, I said. My father signed a clause regarding the maintenance of the property value. I am declaring that his presence in the house is lowering its market value. Initiate eviction proceedings immediately following the foreclosure. I want them out in 30 days. You are not leaving them much room to breathe, Jason noted. They did not give my daughter room to sit, I replied. Burn it down, Jason. Burn it all down. I hung up the phone. The cabin of the Volvo was silent. Vanessa was staring at me. She looked like she was seeing a stranger, but she wasn't afraid. She reached out and touched my arm. Clause 14B? She asked softly. Character default, I explained, putting the car into drive. It is a clause I wrote into the contract myself when I bought their debt 6 months ago. It states that if the borrower engages in conduct that damages the reputation of the family name or demonstrates moral turpitude, the lender can demand full repayment. And pushing a child counts? Vanessa asked. I looked at her. In my court, it counts as a capital offense. I pulled out onto the main road. The snow was falling harder now, covering our tracks. Behind us, Sterling Manor stood tall and proud, completely unaware that it was already a corpse. Daddy Maya called out from the back seat. Yes, sweetie. Are we poor? She asked. Grandpa said we are poor. I looked at her in the rearview mirror. I thought about the bank account I had never shown her. I thought about the trust fund I had set up for her the day she was born, which already had more money in it than my father had made in his entire life. No, Maya, I said. We are not poor, we are just quiet, and from now on, we are going to make a lot of noise. I drove toward the highway. My phone buzzed with a notification. It was a text from Jason. Message read, Repo team dispatched. Target time 5:45. Foreclosure notice filed. Merry Christmas, boss. I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled all night. Vanessa leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. Remind me never to make you angry, she murmured. I took her hand. You never have to worry about that. I only use my teeth on the wolves. As we drove away, I didn't feel relief. I felt anticipation. I knew that back at the house, my father was probably pouring another scotch, laughing about how he had put me in my place. He was probably sleeping soundly in his king-size bed, dreaming of his legacy. Sleep tight, Dad, I whispered to the empty road. Because when you wake up, the nightmare begins. The sun had not yet risen over the pristine snow-covered hills of Connecticut, but the show I had orchestrated was starting right on schedule. I was sitting in the kitchen of our small rental apartment 30 miles away. The heating unit rattled in the corner, and the coffee in my mug was cheap instant brew, not the artisan espresso my father drank. But as I opened my laptop and logged into the remote security system of Sterling Manor, I felt richer than a king. I still had the administrative passwords. My father, in his technological arrogance, had never bothered to change them after I set up the system for him 5 years ago. He thought hacking was something only criminals did not. Realizing that the biggest criminal was sleeping in his master bedroom, the screen flickered to life. I selected the camera labeled Driveway Main. It was 5:55 a.m. The world was grey and silent. The silver Bentley and the black Mercedes sat like frozen statues in the driveway, dusted with a fresh layer of powder. Then I saw them. Twin beams of yellow light cut through the morning mist. A massive flatbed tow truck painted a bright aggressive orange turned slowly through the stone gates. It did not move quietly. The driver, following my specific instructions, had left the heavy diesel engine roaring. The backup beeper began to sound. Beep, beep, beep. The sound echoed off the stone walls of the mansion like a metronome counting down to destruction. I took a sip of coffee. Showtime. On the screen, I saw the lights in the master bedroom turn on. Then the lights in Preston's room. The front door flew open. My father, Thomas Sterling, burst onto the porch. He was not the polished tycoon the world knew. He was wearing silk pajamas that clung to his shivering frame and one slipper. His hair, usually gelled into a helmet of perfection, was standing up in wild tufts. He ran down the snowy steps, waving his arms like a man drowning. "Hey!" he screamed. The microphone on the security camera picked up his voice clearly. "Hey, get away from that car!" The tow truck driver, a massive man in a reflective vest, ignored him. He was already hooking the chains onto the undercarriage of the Bentley. This was a repo team I had handpicked for their efficiency and lack of empathy. They didn't care about sob stories. They only cared about the VIN number. Thomas reached the driver and grabbed his arm. "This is private property," my father shouted, his voice cracking. "Do you know who I am? I am Thomas Sterling. I will have you arrested for trespassing. Unhand my vehicle immediately." The driver stopped working for a second. He stood up, towering over my father. He pulled a laminated clipboard from his jacket. "Bank order," the driver said. His voice was bored. "Vanguard Capital versus Sterling Holdings. Immediate repossession of collateral assets due to contract default. Step back, sir, or I will call the police for obstruction." "Vanguard," Thomas sputtered. "That is impossible. I spoke to the bank yesterday. This is a glitch, a computer error. Stop hooking it up. I command you to stop." The driver just shook his head and engaged the winch. The cable went taut. The silver Bentley, the car my father loved more than he loved his own children, groaned as it was dragged backward onto the flatbed. The tires skidded on the ice. Then came the second humiliation. Lights began to flick on in the neighboring houses. The Vanderbilts across the street. The CEO of Pharmacorp next door. These were people who measured worth by stock portfolios and silence. And right now, the Sterling family was being very loud and very public about their failure. I saw Mrs. Higgins from next door step out onto her porch in her fur-lined robe holding her poodle. She wasn't helping. She was watching. She was witnessing the one thing my father feared more than death: social irrelevance. Preston came running out next, wrapping a duvet around his shoulders. "Dad, what is going on?" he yelled. "Why are they taking the Bentley? Do something!" Preston Thomas shrieked at him. "Call the police! Call the lawyers! This idiot is stealing my car!" Preston looked at the tow truck, then at the neighbors watching from their windows. He realized what was happening before my father did. Preston was a gambler. He knew what a repo looked like. "It is not a mistake," Dad, Preston muttered, shrinking back. "Look at the paperwork." Thomas snatched the clipboard. I zoomed in on the camera feed. I watched his eyes scan the document. I watched the color drain from his face as he read the authorizing signature at the bottom. Vanguard Capital. He dropped the clipboard in the snow. My phone sitting on the table next to my laptop began to vibrate. "Incoming call, Dad." I looked at it. I let it ring. I imagined him standing there in the freezing cold, his hands shaking, dialing the number of the son he had called a failure 12 hours ago. He needed me now. He needed the freelance consultant to fix the glitch. He needed the scapegoat to take the blame. I declined the call. The phone rang again immediately. I declined it again. Then I opened the contact settings and tapped a block caller. On the screen, Thomas was screaming at his phone. He threw it onto the driveway. It slid across the ice and stopped near the tow truck's tire. "Wait!" Thomas yelled at the driver, grabbing the door handle of the Bentley as it began to lift into the air. "My golf clubs are in there. My papers. Personal items can be retrieved at the impound lot in Queens between the hours of 9 and 5, the driver recited. "Please step away from the lifting mechanism." Impound lot. Thomas gasped. Queens. The Bentley was airborne, now tilted at a steep angle. The symbol of his power was looking helpless, dangling from a chain. The driver secured the wheels and climbed back into the cab, but he wasn't done. A second truck, this one black and unmarked, pulled into the driveway. 2 men jumped out. They didn't go for the Mercedes. They walked straight to the garage. My father ran toward them. "Where are you going?" "That is the garage." One of the men held up a key fob. It was the master digital key. I had authorized a remote reset of the garage security codes 10 minutes ago. "We are here for the 2023 Porsche and the vintage Jaguar," the man said, "also listed as collateral." "No," Thomas wailed, "not the Jag. I restored that myself." The garage door rolled up slowly. The interior lights flickered on, revealing the pristine collection inside. The men moved with surgical precision. They weren't just taking cars. They were eviscerating his identity. I watched Preston trying to hide behind a pillar. He saw Mrs. Higgins watching. He waved awkwardly. "It is just a security upgrade," Preston shouted across the lawn to the neighbors. "Taking them in for detailing." Mrs. Higgins didn't wave back. She turned around and went inside, closing her heavy front door. The verdict was delivered. The Sterlings were compromised. In this neighborhood, bankruptcy was a contagious disease, and everyone had just started quarantine. Thomas was now sitting on the front steps, his head in his hands. The Bentley was gone, the truck disappearing down the road. The second truck was loading the Jaguar. I took another sip of coffee. It tasted delicious. I picked up my phone and opened a text message to Jason, my lawyer. Text phase 1 complete. They are awake. Jason replied instantly, phase 2 is live. I just emailed the eviction notice to his personal account and the corporate server. Also, the bank just froze the credit cards. He's going to try to buy breakfast and realize he can't even afford a bagel. I looked back at the screen. Thomas was shivering violently. He looked small. Without the car, without the bluster, without the audience of sycophants, he was just an old man in wet pajamas who had made a very bad bet against his own flesh and blood. Vanessa walked into the kitchen holding Maya. They were both still sleepy. Vanessa looked at the laptop screen, then at me. Is that your dad?" she asked, squinting at the figure on the steps. I nodded. "Why is he sitting outside in the snow?" she asked. "He's waiting for a ride," I said. "But I don't think anyone is coming." Maya climbed onto my lap. "Daddy, can we make pancakes?" she asked. I closed the laptop, shutting off the image of my father's ruin. "Yes, sweetie," I said. "We can have anything we want." I stood up and went to the fridge. As I whisked the eggs, I imagined the silence in the Sterling house right now. The heat would be turned off in 2 hours. The internet would be cut by noon. They had underestimated the freelance consultant. They didn't know that while they were buying fake watches and leasing cars to impress strangers, I was building an empire designed for one specific purpose: to buy their world out from under them. And I had gotten it at a discount. While my father was mourning the loss of his British-engineered status symbol in the driveway, my brother Preston was fighting a battle on a different front, a much more dangerous one. I sat in my car 3 blocks away, monitoring the intercepted signal from Preston's cell phone. I had cloned his SIM card 2 weeks ago, when he left his phone unattended at a family barbecue. He thought he was secure. He thought his encrypted messaging apps were safe. He was wrong. At 7:15 a.m., while the rest of the neighborhood was waking up to the gossip of the Sterling repossession, Preston was locked in his bathroom. I could hear his heavy breathing through the microphone. His phone pinged. It was a notification from a sports betting app. I glanced at my laptop screen, where his digital life was laid out in cold, hard data. Preston wasn't just a bad brother, he was a degenerate gambler. He had bet $50,000 on a college football parlay last night. He needed Alabama to cover the spread. They didn't. The text message that came through next wasn't from a casino. It was from a man named Sal. Message read, "You saw the game, Preston. You are down $215,000. I need 50 grand by noon, or I send the boys to visit your niece. I listened as Preston whimpered. He dialed Sal's number. His voice was trembling, a stark contrast to the arrogant tone he had used with me at the dinner table. Sal, listen, Preston whispered, the panic rising in his throat. I can get it. I just need a few days. My dad, we have assets. Sal's voice was like gravel. I don't care about your daddy, Preston. I care about my money. Noon, or we come to the house. And I hear you have a kid. Nice school he goes to. Shame if something happened at pickup. Preston dropped the phone. I heard it clatter against the bathroom tile. He was hyperventilating. I took a sip of my coffee. This was the moment a rat would gnaw off its own leg to escape a trap. Preston didn't have $50,000. His credit cards were maxed out with a combined balance of $80,000. His bank account was overdrawn. He had stolen from his wife's savings account 3 months ago, which was why she was currently sleeping in the guest room. He needed cash, fast, and he needed it from a source that wouldn't ask questions. I watched on the screen as he scrolled frantically through his files. He stopped on a PDF document, the lake house deed. It was a small cottage in the Berkshires that our mother had left to us. It was the only thing she had owned in her own name separate from Thomas's leveraging schemes. In her will, she had left it to both of us, 50-50. It was worth about $300,000. Quick sale value, maybe $250. Preston did the math. If he could sell it today to a cash buyer, he knew in the city he could pay off Sal and have enough left over to bet on the Sunday games. But he had a problem. He needed my signature. I watched him wash his face. I heard him practicing his lines in the mirror. Hey, Ethan, just thinking about Mom. We should protect the house. Yeah, that sounds good. He picked up the phone and dialed my number. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Hello, I said. Ethan, bro, Preston said. His voice was forced, overly cheerful. Man, crazy morning, right? Dad is losing it. What do you want, Preston? Look, I am calling because I am worried, he said. With the bank coming after Dad, they might try to seize everything, even Mom's cottage. I spoke to a lawyer friend. He said we need to transfer the title into a trust immediately to protect it. A trust, I repeated. Yeah, a holding trust. Preston lied. He was sweating. I could hear the desperate tapping of his fingers on the counter. I just need you to sign a quitclaim deed so I can move the asset. It is just a formality. I will handle all the fees, taking care of the family. I looked at the time. 7:45 a.m. He had 4 hours before Sal came looking for him. Send me the location, I said. Really, Preston asked, surprised by how easy it was. You will meet me. Diner on 4th Street, I said. 20 minutes. Bring the papers. I hung up. I arrived at the diner 10 minutes early. I ordered black coffee and waited. When Preston walked in, he looked like a man holding together a crumbling dam with scotch tape. His eyes were darting around the room. He was looking for loan sharks in every shadow. He slid into the booth opposite me. He didn't order anything. He just pulled a thick envelope out of his jacket. Thanks for coming, Ethan, he said, pushing the envelope across the greasy table. Really, this is for the best. We don't want the bank taking Mom's place. I opened the envelope. Inside was a quitclaim deed. It was a standard legal form, but Preston had filled it out creatively. It transferred my 50% ownership of the lake house to Preston Sterling for the sum of $1. There was no trust. There was no protection. It was a straight theft. Where is the trust agreement, I asked. Scanning the document. Oh, the lawyers are drafting it, Preston said quickly. This just gets the property into my name so I can move it into the trust later. It is faster this way. Time is of the essence, I looked at him. I saw the desperation. I saw the greed. He was willing to steal his brother's inheritance, the last memory of our mother, to pay for a failed sports bet. Preston, I said, leaning back, I checked the property records this morning. Preston froze. Why? Because I was curious, I said. The cottage is appraised at $300,000. My share is $150. You are asking me to give that to you for $1. It is not giving it to me, Preston insisted, his voice rising. It is protecting it. Do you trust the bank? Do you trust Dad? I am the only one thinking clearly here. I pulled a pen from my pocket. Preston's eyes widened. He thought he had me. He thought I was the same gullible little brother he used to push around. He watched the pen hover over the signature line. He was mentally spending the money already. I brought the pen down. But instead of signing my name, I drew a line through the entire paragraph, granting him power of attorney. I am not signing this. Preston, I said. Preston's face went white. Ethan, you have to. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said. You owe Sal Moretti $215,000, and you have until noon. The silence at the table was deafening. The waitress came by to refill my coffee, but she backed away when she saw the look on Preston's face. How do you know that? He whispered. I know everything, I said. I know about the parlay. I know about the stolen savings. I know you are terrified. Then help me, Preston begged. He reached across the table, grabbing my wrist. His hands were cold and clammy. They will hurt me, Ethan. They will hurt Connor. Please, just sign the house over. I will pay you back. I swear. I have a lock on the Sunday game. You are still gambling, I said, shaking his hand off. You are sitting here begging me to save your life, and you are already planning the next bet. It is a sure thing, Preston cried. Nothing is a sure thing, I said, standing up and dropping a $20 bill on the table. Except math. And the math says you are insolvent. I walked toward the door. Ethan, wait, Preston screamed. He scrambled out of the booth. You can't leave me. I am your brother. I stopped and turned around. The entire diner was watching. You stopped being my brother when you laughed while Dad shoved my daughter, I said. But what do I tell Sal? Preston sobbed. I looked at my watch. It was 8:15 a.m. Tell him you bet on the wrong family, I said. I walked out into the cold morning air. Behind me, I could hear Preston frantically dialing his phone, looking for another lie, another victim. But he was out of options. And I was just getting started. I had taken the car. I had taken the house. Now I had taken his safety. The dismantle was proceeding exactly according to plan. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor of the Sterling Holdings Tower took exactly 58 seconds. I timed it on my watch. In those 58 seconds, my ears popped twice, and I mentally reviewed the acquisition strategy I had mapped out on my whiteboard at home. I stepped out into the lobby. It was designed to intimidate. The floors were Italian marble, polished to a mirror finish that reflected the terrified faces of employees who knew the company was sinking. The walls were adorned with modern art that cost more than the average American home, but as I walked toward the reception desk, I noticed the details that others missed. The fresh flowers in the vase were wilting at the edges, likely 3 days old, because the florist account was on hold. There was a layer of dust on the frame of the abstract painting. The receptionist, a woman named Sheila, who had been with my father for 20 years, was not typing. She was staring at her screen with a furrowed brow, likely reading an email about a delayed paycheck. When she saw me, her expression shifted from worry to practiced disdain. It was a reflex in this building. If your last name was Sterling, but you didn't drive a German car, you were invisible. You cannot go back there, Ethan, she said, not bothering to lift the phone. Mr. Sterling is in a high-level crisis meeting. He gave strict instructions. No beggars, no solicitors, and definitely no family members asking for handouts. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even slow down. Tell him the glitch is here, I said calmly. I walked past her desk. She scrambled to grab the phone, whispering frantically, but I was already pushing open the heavy double doors to the executive suite. The office was chaotic. Usually my father demanded library silence, but today the air was thick with the smell of panic and stale coffee. Papers were strewn across the long conference table. My father, Thomas, was pacing behind his massive oak desk. He was screaming into a headset. I don't care what the system says, he roared. I am Thomas Sterling. My credit is impeccable. You unfreeze those accounts immediately, or I will buy your bank and fire you. He listened for a moment, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. Then he ripped the headset off and threw it against the wall. It shattered. He looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. For a second, he looked relieved, thinking I was a lawyer or a fixer. Then he recognized my old jacket and the scuffed boots. The relief turned into pure, unadulterated hatred. I told you to stay away, Thomas hissed. He leaned his hands on the desk, breathing heavily. Isn't it enough that you embarrassed me last night? Now you come here to watch me bleed? I walked into the room and closed the door behind me. The latch clicked softly. I came because you called me Dad, I said. You left a voicemail this morning. You said we needed to talk about my future. Thomas laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Right, he said. Your future. He walked around the desk. He looked smaller than he had yesterday. The stress of the repo and the frozen assets was eating him alive from the inside out. But like a wounded animal, he was most dangerous when he was cornered. He needed to feel powerful. He needed to dominate someone. And since he couldn't dominate the bank, he decided to dominate me. He reached under his desk and pulled out a bundle of grey fabric. He tossed it at me. It hit my chest and fell to the floor. I looked down. It was a jumpsuit. A grey, heavy industrial jumpsuit with a patch on the pocket that read, "Facilities." It smelled faintly of industrial solvent and degradation. "Put it on," Thomas said. I looked up at him. "Excuse me, you want a job, don't you?" Thomas sneered. "You are always whining about how I don't support your freelance nonsense. Well, I am feeling generous today. I have an opening." He kicked the pile of fabric toward my feet. "The night cleaning crew quit this morning," Thomas said. "Probably because they are lazy just like you. I need the executive washroom scrubbed. I need the trash taken out. And I need someone to scrape the gum off the bottom of the conference table. That is your speed, isn't it?" He walked over to the window looking out at the city he thought he owned. "I pay minimum wage," he continued. "No benefits. But you get to tell people you work at Sterling Holdings. That should be enough prestige for a disappointment like you." I looked at the jumpsuit. I looked at the man who had raised me. Most sons would have walked out. Most sons would have thrown the uniform back in his face and screamed about dignity. But I wasn't looking for dignity. I was looking for access. I knew that Sterling Holdings had a strict security policy. Only employees with a valid contract and an active ID badge could access the server room on the 30th floor. Only employees could enter the records archive in the basement. As a visitor, I was powerless. As a janitor, I was invisible. And invisibility is a superpower. I bent down and picked up the uniform. "Okay," I said. Thomas turned around surprised. He had expected a fight. He had expected me to storm out so he could laugh at my fragility. My compliance confused him. "Okay," he repeated. "I need the money, Dad." I lied. My voice was low, defeated. "Maya needs braces. Vanessa. Well, things are tight. I will take the job." Thomas smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had just broken the neck of its prey. He walked back to his desk and sat down, regaining his composure. "Good," he said, drumming his fingers on the mahogany. "It fits you. Finally, you will be useful. You can start by cleaning up that headset I just threw." I held the uniform in one arm. I reached into my jacket pocket with the other hand. "There is just one thing," I said. Thomas rolled his eyes. "What now? An advance? Forget it." "No," I said. I pulled out a folded document. It was 3 pages long, standard legal formatting stapled in the corner. "Since I am technically working as an independent contractor for the facilities department, I need you to sign this. It is just a standard liability waiver and payment agreement." Thomas scoffed. "You think I'm going to sue you if you slip on a toilet seat? It is for my protection, Dad." I said, playing the part of the anxious bureaucratic failure. Vanessa insisted. "You know how she is with legal stuff. If I don't get this signed, she won't let me take the shift. It just says I get paid every 2 weeks, and I am not liable for accidental breakage." I placed the document on his desk. I also placed a cheap ballpoint pen next to it. Thomas looked at the paper with disgust. He didn't pick it up. He didn't scan the clauses. He was too busy watching his email inbox waiting for the bank to reply. In his mind, I was an insect. "You don't read contracts written by insects. Just give it here," he snapped. He grabbed the pen. "Wait," I said, feigning hesitation. "You should probably read Clause 8. It talks about overtime." "I don't pay overtime," Thomas barked. He flipped to the last page. He didn't look at Clause 8. If he had looked at Clause 8, specifically Section C, Paragraph 4, he would have seen a very interesting sentence. A sentence that I had drafted myself at 4 a.m. the previous night. It read, "The contractor shall retain full intellectual property rights to all digital and physical systems maintained, cleaned, or supervised during the tenure of employment, and shall be granted unrestricted administrative access to all facility archives for the purpose of quality control auditing." In legal terms, it was a Trojan horse. By signing this to hire a janitor, he was legally granting me permission to audit his entire company's history. He was giving me the keys to the kingdom because he was too arrogant to believe I knew how to use a lock. Thomas scribbled his signature at the bottom. It was a messy, angry scroll. There he said, shoving the paper back at me, "Now get out of my sight. Go down to HR and get your badge." "And Ethan," I paused at the door holding the document that was now the most valuable piece of paper in the building. Yes, Dad. Don't let the clients see you, he said. Use the service elevator. I don't want anyone knowing my son cleans toilets. I looked at him one last time. I won't let you down, I said. I am going to clean this entire company from top to bottom. I walked out of the office. I walked past the receptionist who glared at me. I pressed the button for the elevator. When the doors closed, I didn't go to the lobby. I pressed the button for the 30th floor. The server room. I unfolded the jumpsuit. Inside the pocket, I had hidden a USB drive containing a decrypting algorithm. My father thought he had just hired a janitor to scrub his floors. He didn't realize he had just authorized a forensic audit of his illegal offshore accounts. I looked at the signature on the contract. It was wet ink. It was beautiful. I put on the gray jacket. It was tight in the shoulders. Time to take out the trash, I whispered. I watched the floor numbers tick down. 40, 39, 38. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from the bank. Alert Vanguard Capital has successfully acquired the secondary mortgage on the Sterling Commercial Tower. I smiled. I was now technically the landlord of the building I was about to clean. The elevator dinged at the 30th floor. The hallway was dark and cool, humming with the sound of server fans. A security guard was sitting at a desk reading a comic book. He looked up annoyed. Badge, he grunted. I held up the paper my father had just signed. New facilities manager, I said. The big boss sent me. Said there is a mess in the server room that needs immediate attention. The guard glanced at Thomas Sterling's signature. He knew that signature. He feared that signature. He didn't even check my ID. Go ahead, the guard said, buzzing the door open. Just don't unplug anything. I walked into the server room. The blue lights of the data racks flickered around me like stars. This was the brain of the company. Every email, every wire transfer, every bribe my father had ever paid was stored on these spinning discs. And thanks to his arrogance, I had a front row seat. I found the main terminal. I plugged in the USB drive. The screen flashed green. Access granted. I began the download. It would take 40 minutes to copy the last 10 years of financial records. 40 minutes to find the smoking gun that would send Thomas Sterling to federal prison, not just to bankruptcy court. I pulled a rag out of my pocket and started wiping down the keyboard just in case anyone looked in the window. I was the best janitor this company had ever seen. It had been exactly 1 week since I stripped my father of his prize Bentley and his dignity in the snow. Most men would have used that week to reflect on their failures. Most men would have looked at their frozen bank accounts and the eviction notice taped to their front door and realized that the game was over. But Thomas Sterling was not most men. He was a narcissist of the highest order, and to a narcissist, rock bottom is just a temporary misunderstanding that can be fixed with one good handshake. I sat in my home office, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating the darkened room. On the center screen, I had access to a very specific financial report. It was a transaction log from a high-risk lending firm based in New Jersey. In common parlance, they were loan sharks. They charged 40% interest compounded weekly, and they collected their debts with baseball bats rather than court orders. At 2:00 p.m. on New Year's Eve, a deposit of $100,000 hit a discreet account controlled by my father. He had leveraged the only thing he had left, which was a small life insurance policy he had forgotten to cancel and likely promised them assets he no longer owned. It was fraud plain and simple, but Thomas didn't see it that way. He saw it as bridge capital. 5 minutes later, that money was gone. It was transferred directly to the planning committee of the New York Metropolitan Business Gala. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of sparkling water. The Metropolitan Gala was the most exclusive event of the year. It was where the true power players of the East Coast gathered to trade secrets and merge empires over caviar and vintage champagne. The ticket price was $50,000 a plate. My father had just spent money he might die for just to buy 2 seats at a table where he was no longer welcome. I tapped a key on my keyboard and opened the audio feed from my father's study. I had left a small passive listening device behind the bookshelf years ago. It was battery-operated and transmitted only when it detected voice frequencies. The audio crackled to life. "You see, Preston," my father's voice boomed. It sounded stronger than it had in days. "This is how you win. You don't cower in the dark just because the bank made a mistake. You go to where the money is." "But Dad," Preston's voice whined. He sounded terrified. That was Sal's money. If we don't pay him back by Monday, he said he's going to break my fingers. We just spent 100 grand on dinner tickets. We could have paid off half my debt with that. Thomas laughed. It was a delusional, manic sound. You're thinking like a poor person, Preston. That is your problem. You look at the cost. I look at the opportunity. Tonight, every major investor in New York will be in that ballroom. The chairman of Vanguard Capital will be there. I smiled at the screen. Yes, the chairman would be there. I am going to walk up to him. Thomas continued, the arrogance dripping from every syllable. I am going to look him in the eye, man to man. I will explain that this foreclosure business is a clerical error caused by a rogue algorithm. Once he meets me, once he sees the caliber of man I am, he won't just reverse the foreclosure. He will invest. I will walk out of that gala with a check for $50 million. But what if he doesn't, Preston asked. He will, Thomas snapped. Because I am Thomas Sterling. People invest in the name. They invest in the legacy. We just need FaceTime. That is all. We just need to get in the room. I minimized the audio window and opened the guest list for the gala. As the majority shareholder of the hosting organization, a fact my father was blissfully unaware of, I had final approval on all attendees. When the request for 2 tickets under the name Sterling came across my desk an hour ago, my assistant had flagged it for immediate rejection. She knew they were insolvent. She knew they were persona non grata. I had overruled her. I had clicked the button marked approve. I didn't just want them to lose. I wanted them to lose in public. I wanted them to spend that stolen money, put on their tuxedos, and walk into the lion's den, believing they were the hunters. I looked at the seating chart. I placed them at table 4. It was a good table right near the front. It offered a perfect view of the stage. I wanted to make sure my father had a clear line of sight when the keynote speaker was announced. My phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. Text read, "The dress just arrived. It is stunning. Are you sure about this, Ethan? It is a big reveal." I typed back, "I have never been more sure. They spent 100 grand to see the boss. Let's give them a show." I stood up and walked to my closet. Hanging there was a tuxedo made by a tailor in London who only accepted clients by referral. It cost more than the car my father used to drive. Next to it was a pair of cufflinks that doubled as encrypted USB drives. I imagined Thomas right now. He was probably polishing his shoes, humming to himself, convincing himself that he was the smartest man in the room. He was treating this gala as his coronation, his return to glory. He believed that the world worked on connections and handshakes and old boys clubs. He believed that because he was a white man with a recognizable last name, he would be given a second chance. He didn't realize that the world had changed. The new world ran on data. It ran on leverage, and it ran on receipts. I checked the time. It was 6:00 p.m. The limousine I had hired for them would be arriving at their house in 30 minutes. I had paid for that too anonymously, of course. I wanted them to arrive in style. I wanted them to feel important. The higher they climbed in their own minds, the further they would fall when I pulled the rug out. I went back to the computer and sent one final instruction to the event security team. Message. The guests at table 4, Thomas and Preston Sterling. Do not stop them at the door. Do not ask for credit cards for incidentals. Give them the best champagne. Let them feel comfortable. I will handle the bill personally. I closed the laptop. The screen faded to black, reflecting my face. I didn't look like the freelance consultant who drove a Volvo anymore. I looked like exactly what I was, the executioner. I walked out of the office to get dressed. Tonight, the Sterling family would learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. You cannot buy your way into a room that you have already been sold out of. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the wolves were putting on their bow ties. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a sea of black ties and diamonds. The air smelled of orchid arrangements that cost $5,000 a stem, an ambition that cost significantly more. From my vantage point on the mezzanine balcony, I looked down at the 500 guests. To the uninvited, this was a party. To the people in the room, it was a hunting ground. Deals were being struck over plates of Wagyu beef. Mergers were being whispered behind champagne flutes. And then there was table 4. My father and brother sat there like 2 shipwreck survivors clinging to a raft. They were trying to look like they belonged. Thomas was laughing too loudly at jokes he did not understand. Preston was drinking vodka martinis as if they were water, his eyes darting around the room, scanning for the mythical investor who would save him from the loan sharks. They looked pathetic, but what they were about to do would make them legendary. I adjusted my cufflinks. I checked the time on my phone. 8:15 p.m. The keynote speeches were scheduled to begin in 5 minutes. Down on the floor, the service staff moved like ghosts. They were dressed in standard white jackets and black trousers, carrying silver trays with invisible efficiency. Then Vanessa entered the room. She was not wearing a white jacket. She was wearing a floor-length gown made of midnight black velvet designed by a woman in Milan who only made 10 dresses a year. It was structured, powerful, and elegant. It hugged her silhouette and flared slightly at the feet. Her hair was pulled back in a severe regal bun. Around her neck sat a diamond choker that I had bought at auction last month. It was worth more than the entire Sterling family estate. She walked through the crowd with the grace of a panther. People parted for her. CEOs of Fortune 500 companies nodded respectfully as she passed. They knew who she was. In the legal world, Vanessa Williams was a force of nature. She was the youngest federal judge in the district, known for handing down sentences that made grown men weep. But my brother Preston did not see a federal judge. Preston saw a black woman in a black dress, and in his narrow, prejudiced, alcohol-soaked brain, that equation equaled only one thing: service. I watched through the glass railing as Preston spotted her. He squinted. He nudged Thomas. "Look, Dad," Preston slurred, pointing a finger. "Is that who I think it is?" Thomas looked up from his empty glass. He adjusted his glasses. "It is Ethan's wife," Thomas muttered. "What is she doing here?" Preston laughed. It was a nasty, wet sound. "What do you think she's doing?" Preston said. "Look at the dress. She is working. I told you Ethan was broke. He probably sent her here to pick up extra shifts catering to the people we are about to do business with. God, that is embarrassing." "It is perfect," Thomas said, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "It proves we were right to cut them off. They are the help, Preston. We are the guests." Preston puffed out his chest. He felt a surge of power. He had been feeling small all day, terrified of the debt collectors. Now he saw an opportunity to punch down. He saw a chance to exert dominance over the woman who had witnessed his humiliation at Christmas. "Watch this," Preston said to the two strangers sitting at their table. He turned in his chair. Vanessa was passing about 10 feet away, heading toward the stage. "Hey," Preston shouted. It was loud. Several heads turned. Vanessa did not stop. She didn't even flinch. Preston's face turned red. He hated being ignored. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Snap! Sap! "You," Preston barked. "Sweetheart, over here." The room went quiet in a 10-foot radius. Snapping your fingers at a person in this setting was social suicide. But Preston was too drunk on his own ego to notice the appalled looks from the surrounding tables. Vanessa stopped. She turned slowly on her heel. Her expression was unreadable. It was the face she wore when she was about to deliver a life sentence. She walked over to table 4. She stood tall, looking down at Preston. "Can I help you, Preston?" she asked. Her voice was ice. Preston smirked. He leaned back, holding up his empty glass. "Yeah, you can help me," he said. "I have been waiting 10 minutes for a refill. Run back to the bar and get me a vodka tonic. Heavy on the vodka, and try not to spill it on my tuxedo. It is worth more than your husband makes in a year." The two strangers at the table looked horrified. One of them, a banker from Chase, started to say something, but Preston cut him off. "It is okay," Preston told them. "I know her. She is my brother's charity case. We try to give her work when we can, but you know how it is. Hard to train good help these days." Thomas chuckled. He didn't stop his son. He enjoyed the spectacle. He wanted Vanessa to feel the weight of her station. Vanessa looked at the empty glass. Then she looked at Preston. She didn't get angry. She didn't throw the drink in his face. She simply smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "I am afraid I cannot do that, Preston," she said softly. "Why not?" Preston sneered. "Not your section, no," Vanessa said, "because I don't serve drinks to people who are about to be removed by security." Preston laughed loudly. "Removed. Do you know who I am?" "I am a Sterling. I paid $50,000 to be here. Now go get my drink before I find your manager and have you fired." I tightened my grip on the balcony railing. The moment was here. Suddenly, the house lights dimmed. The chatter in the room died down. A spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the center stage. The master of ceremonies, a famous news anchor, stepped up to the microphone. His voice boomed through the surround sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it is my honor to welcome you to the 40th Annual Metropolitan Gala. Tonight is a record-breaking night. We have raised over $10 million for inner-city education. Applause rippled through the room. Preston clapped lazily, still holding his glass out to Vanessa, expecting her to scurry away. But she didn't move. She stayed right there, looming over him. And the MC continued, "We would like to extend a special gratitude to our diamond sponsor, the individual who made the single largest donation in the history of this organization, a woman who has dedicated her life to justice and equality." The spotlight began to move across the room. It swept over the tables. It swept over Thomas, who straightened his tie, thinking for a split second that maybe, just maybe, the bank had made a donation in his name. "Please, welcome," the MC announced, "the Honorable Judge of the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, Vanessa Williams." The spotlight hit table 4. It did not hit Thomas. It did not hit Preston. It landed squarely on Vanessa. The brilliance of the light made her diamond necklace sparkle like a supernova. She glowed in the darkness, a vision of absolute power. The room erupted. 500 people stood up. The applause was deafening. It was thunderous. Preston froze. His brain tried to process the information. Federal judge, diamond sponsor, Vanessa. He looked at the woman standing in the light, the woman he had just snapped his fingers at, the woman he had ordered to fetch him a vodka tonic. His hand went numb. The crystal glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the edge of the table first, then shattered onto the floor. Crash! Red wine and shards of glass exploded over Preston's patent leather shoes. The sound was audible even over the applause. Vanessa looked down at the mess. She looked at Preston, whose mouth was hanging open, his face draining of all color until he looked like a corpse. She leaned in close. The spotlight was still on her, capturing this moment for the entire room to see. She whispered loud enough for Thomas to hear as well. "You might want to clean that up, Preston. I hear the venue charges extra for stains. And considering your bank accounts are frozen, that might be a problem." She turned away from them. She walked toward the stage, her head held high, bathing in the adoration of the crowd. I watched from the balcony. I saw Thomas gripping the tablecloth. He looked like he was having a stroke. He looked at the stage where my wife was shaking hands with the mayor of New York. He realized in that moment that the waitress he had scorned had the power to sign warrants. He realized that the charity case had just donated $2 million without blinking. I saw Preston look down at the broken glass. He was trembling. He looked around the table. The banker from Chase was staring at him with pure disgust. The banker stood up, took his napkin, and moved to another table. Preston was alone. He was covered in wine. He was exposed. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to the security team. Message table 4, disruption. Remove them now. Down below, 3 large men in earpieces began to move toward my father and brother. I turned away from the railing. The first act was over. The humiliation was complete. Now it was time for the financial execution. I adjusted my tuxedo jacket and headed for the stairs. I had a keynote speech to deliver, and I knew exactly who I wanted to look at when I announced the acquisition of Sterling Holdings. The transition from the main ballroom to the VIP lounge was less than 50 feet physically, but economically, it was a journey across continents. The main floor was for millionaires who wanted to be seen. The VIP lounge was for billionaires who wanted to disappear. It was a sanctuary of dark mahogany, dim lighting, and silence guarded by 2 men who looked like they had just retired from the Secret Service. I stood inside swirling a glass of sparkling water. I was not drinking alcohol. I needed my mind razor sharp for what was about to happen. Around me, the titans of industry were discussing global markets in hushed tones. The CEO of TechCorp nodded at me as he passed. The founder of the largest logistics firm in Asia raised his glass in my direction. They did not know me as the freelance consultant with the old Volvo. They knew me as E. Sterling, the phantom investor who had correctly predicted the last 3 market crashes. Through the one-way glass wall, I watched my father and brother. Thomas Sterling was a man possessed. He had just watched his daughter-in-law, the woman he had dismissed as a charity case, receive a standing ovation from the city's elite. Most men would feel shame. Thomas felt opportunity. His narcissism was a survival mechanism. He had already rewritten the narrative in his head. In his mind, Vanessa was no longer the enemy. She was an asset. She was a sterling. And therefore, her success was his success. I watched him grab Preston by the arm. Preston was still wiping red wine off his tuxedo trousers with a cocktail napkin, looking like a disgraced waiter. Thomas whispered something aggressively into his ear, pointed at the VIP entrance, and began to march toward it. He was coming to claim his prize. I moved away from the glass. I adjusted the lapels of my tuxedo. It was a Tom Ford Windsor cut, midnight blue, tailored to within a millimeter of my life. It did not look like something a freelancer could afford. It looked like something that cost more than my father's mortgage. I turned to the security guard at the door. "Let them in," I said softly. The guard nodded. A moment later, the heavy door swung open. Thomas Sterling burst into the room, dragging a reluctant Preston behind him. My father's eyes were wild. He was scanning the room, looking for Vanessa. He ignored the other billionaires. He ignored the social protocol. He was a drowning man, looking for a life raft. He spotted Vanessa standing near the fireplace talking to the state governor. "Vanessa," Thomas called out. His voice was too loud for the room. It echoed off the wood paneling, causing several conversations to stop. Vanessa turned. The governor looked annoyed at the interruption, but Thomas didn't care. He walked right up to them, spreading his arms wide, a fake plastic smile plastered across his face. "There she is," Thomas announced, beaming as if he hadn't tried to evict her 24 hours ago. "The star of the evening. I must say I was completely surprised. You never told us you were a federal judge. Keeping secrets from the family, are we?" He tried to hug her. Vanessa took a smooth, calculated step back. Thomas hugged the empty air. "Mr. Sterling," Vanessa said. Her voice was polite but distant, the tone she used for defendants who were trying to plead insanity. "I am in the middle of a conversation." "Oh, nonsense," Thomas laughed, waving a hand at the governor. "The governor understands. Family comes first, right? I was just telling Preston. I said, son, did you know your sister-in-law was this talented? We are so proud of you, Vanessa. Really, a credit to the Sterling name." Preston nodded vigorously, trying to hide the wine stain on his leg. "Yeah, totally. Proud." Thomas leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, but in the quiet room, everyone could hear him. "Listen, Vanessa, about last night. Emotions were high. The holidays are stressful. But now that we know the truth, we can fix this. I am in a bit of a liquidity bind. Just a temporary cash flow issue with the bank. Since you are a diamond sponsor, you obviously have access to significant capital. I need you to sign a bridge loan for the company. Just $5 million. We can call it an investment. I will even put you on the board." He paused, waiting for her gratitude. He actually thought offering her a seat on the board of his failing company was a gift. Vanessa looked at him. She looked at the desperation sweating through his pores. "I don't think that is a good idea, Thomas," she said. "Why not?" Thomas demanded, his smile faltering. "We are family. You have the money. I saw the donation. $2 million to orphans. You throw money away on strangers, but you won't help the man who gave you a last name." He was getting aggressive now. The mask was slipping. "That is enough," I said. I stepped out from the shadows of the corner. Thomas spun around. "Ethan," he snapped. "What are you doing in here? This area is for VIPs. Did you sneak in to beg for free drinks too? Get out before you embarrass me further. Go wait in the car." He turned back to Vanessa, dismissing me entirely. He didn't notice the silence in the room. He didn't notice that the governor was looking at me with respect, not disdain. I walked closer. The sound of my dress shoes on the parquet floor was rhythmic, deliberate. I said, "That is enough, Dad." Thomas turned back to me, his face red with rage. "Don't you dare tell me what is enough," he spat. "You are a failure, Ethan. You are a zero. You have never contributed a dime to this family. You stand there in that rented suit, and you try to lecture me. It is not rented," I said. I stopped 3 feet away from him. I stood tall, my posture perfect, my hands relaxed at my sides. The transformation was undeniable. The slouching, apologetic son was gone. In his place stood a man who radiated absolute authority. Thomas blinked. He looked at the suit. He looked at the fabric. He knew quality. He realized with a jolt of confusion that my tuxedo was significantly more expensive than his own. Who bought you that?" Thomas stammered. "Did she buy it for you?" He pointed at Vanessa. "Are you letting your wife dress you up like a doll?" I reached into my inner pocket. Thomas flinched, as if he expected a weapon. In a way, yes, I pulled out a sleek black smartphone. But this is not about clothes, it is about arithmetic. I tapped the screen. The brightness illuminated my face. You asked Vanessa for $5 million, I said. You called it a liquidity bind. That is an interesting way to pronounce insolvency. I looked around the room. I made eye contact with the CEO of Chase Bank who was standing nearby. Hello, Robert, I said to the banker. Robert nodded. Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Good to see you again. Thomas looked between us, his mouth falling open. You know, Robert. I turned back to my father. I know everyone, Dad. That is what happens when you run the fund that owns their debt. I looked down at my phone reading from the screen. Let's look at the numbers, shall we? Thomas Sterling. Sterling Holdings. Current assets. 1 commercial tower heavily leveraged, 3 residential properties all in foreclosure as of this morning. Cash on hand, negative $400 after your check for these tickets bounces tomorrow. Thomas went pale. How do you have my bank records? This is illegal. I will sue you. It is not illegal, I say calmly. It is due diligence. I took a step closer. You owe $12,450,000 to a consortium of lenders, I said. The interest rate was floating, but it just locked in at 9% due to your credit downgrade. I swiped the screen. You also owe $215,000 to a private lender named Salvatore Moretti, I said, glancing at Preston. Or rather, your son does. Preston let out a squeak of terror. He backed up, knocking into a side table. Thomas was shaking. Who are you? He whispered. You are my son. You are a freelance consultant. You fix computers. I laughed. It was a cold, short sound. I do fix computers, Dad. I fix the algorithms that run the global markets. I founded Vanguard Capital 6 years ago. I didn't tell you because I wanted to build something real. Something that wasn't poisoned by your ego. Vanguard. Thomas gasped. He grabbed the back of a sofa to steady himself. Vanguard Capital is the firm that seized my Bentley. And your house, I added. And your company. The room was deathly silent. Every billionaire, every power player was watching. They weren't watching a family argument. They were watching a hostile takeover in real time. You did this, Thomas choked out. You took my car. You ruined my Christmas. You ruined it yourself, I said. My voice dropped an octave. I was just the one who signed the paperwork. I held up the phone so he could see the screen. It showed a digital contract. I bought your debt, Dad. Every single cent of it. I bought the mortgage on the house. I bought the lien on the office tower. I even bought the loan shark's note on Preston's gambling debt. I paused for effect. I own you. Thomas looked at me with horror. He looked at Vanessa, who was standing beside me, her arms crossed, a look of vindication on her face. He looked at the governor. He looked at the CEO of Chase. He realized that everyone in the room knew. He was the only one who hadn't seen the shark in the water. You can't do this, Thomas pleaded. His voice cracked. He was no longer the patriarch. He was a beggar. We are family, Ethan. I am your father. I raised you. I gave you life. You gave me a complex, I corrected. You gave me a lifetime of insecurity. And yesterday, you gave my daughter a bruise on her arm. I put the phone back in my pocket. That pushed the price of the acquisition up, I said. But I was happy to pay it. Preston stepped forward, tears streaming down his face. Ethan, please. The guy, Sal, he is going to kill me. No, he isn't, I said, without looking at him. I paid Sal off this morning. You don't owe him anything. Preston collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing with relief. Thank you. Oh God, thank you. You owe me, I said coldly, and I collect with interest. You are going to work off every cent. I hear the mailroom is hiring. I turned back to Thomas. You came here looking for an investor, Dad. You wanted to meet the chairman of Vanguard Capital. Well, here I am. I spread my arms. Make your pitch. Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at his tuxedo, which suddenly seemed cheap. He looked at his hands, which were shaking uncontrollably. The arrogance was gone. The bluster was gone. All that was left was an old man who had bet against his own blood and lost everything. Thomas stammered. I waited 5 seconds. Pitch is over, I said. I turned to the security guards. Gentlemen, I said, these 2 guests are trespassing. They don't have the assets to be in this room. Please escort them out. And make sure they don't take any of the free appetizers on the way out. Those are for members only. One of the guards stepped forward and grabbed Thomas by the elbow. Mr. Sterling, the guard said, this way, please. Thomas didn't fight. He didn't scream. He looked at me with eyes full of shock. He looked at Vanessa. "Ethan," he whispered. "Son." I turned my back on him. I picked up my glass of sparkling water. I looked at Vanessa. She raised her champagne flute. "To family," she said softly. "To the family we choose," I replied. I heard the heavy doors close behind them. I heard the muffled sound of Preston crying in the hallway. I took a sip of water. It was crisp, cold, and clean. The governor walked up to me, extending his hand. "Brutal Mr. Sterling," the governor said, a look of admiration in his eyes. "But efficient. Shall we discuss that infrastructure bond?" Now I smiled. Yes, let's. I was no longer the son of Thomas Sterling. I was the man who had just erased him, and the night was just beginning. 2 days after I evicted my family from the VIP lounge, reality finally caught up with the Sterling legacy. It did not happen in a boardroom or a ballroom. It happened in the hallway of a Motel 6 of the interstate, the only place Thomas and Preston could afford, with the $300 of cash they had managed to scrape together from pawned cufflinks. I was not there when it happened, but I read the police report and the hospital intake forms. I know exactly how the tragedy unfolded. It was a disaster born of negligence and the same arrogance that had destroyed their financial lives. It was 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. Preston was asleep, hungover from cheap liquor. Thomas was in the bathroom staring at his reflection, likely trying to convince himself that this was just a temporary setback. Connor, my 8-year-old nephew, was bored. He was a child who was used to acres of lawn and a playroom full of video games. Now he was confined to a 300-square-foot room that smelled of stale cigarettes. He was running up and down the motel's exterior, concrete stairs, playing a game where he pretended to be a superhero. He was wearing socks. The stairs were slick with morning dew. Physics, unlike my father, does not care about your last name. Connor slipped on the top landing. He tumbled down 12 concrete steps. His body hit the metal railing with a sickening crunch before he landed at the bottom unconscious. A jagged piece of rusted metal from the railing had torn a deep gash in his leg, severing a minor artery. The scream that followed woke half the motel. Thomas ran out in his undershirt. When he saw his grandson lying in a pool of blood, the red liquid spreading across the dirty concrete, panic set in. For all his faults, Thomas did care about the idea of his legacy, and Connor was the vessel for that legacy. They didn't have a car. I had taken them all. Thomas had to do the one thing he considered beneath him. He had to beg a maid to call 911. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics loaded Connor onto a stretcher. Thomas and Preston tried to climb into the back. "Family only," the paramedics said. "I am Thomas Sterling," my father roared, though his voice lacked its usual thunder. "That is my grandson. That is the heir to the Sterling name." They let him in mostly to get him to stop screaming. I received the notification 20 minutes later. As the legal guardian of the trust that now owned their health insurance policy, which I had not cancelled because I am not a monster, I was alerted the moment Connor was admitted to the emergency room at St. Jude's Hospital. I drove there immediately, not to gloat, but to witness the final act of this tragedy. When I arrived at the ER, the scene was chaotic. Connor was behind a curtain in the trauma bay. Doctors were shouting orders. The blood loss was significant. Thomas and Preston were standing in the hallway, blocking the path of nurses. Preston was sobbing into his hands, useless as always. Thomas was pacing, his eyes wild, his shirt stained with his grandson's blood. When he saw me walking down the corridor, he didn't attack me. He didn't ask for money. He pointed at the trauma room. "They say he needs blood," Thomas shouted at me. His voice was cracking. "They say he's losing too much." A doctor stepped out of the curtain. He looked exhausted. "Family of Connor Sterling?" the doctor asked. "We are here," Thomas said, stepping forward. "I am his grandfather. This is his father. We need to perform a transfusion immediately," the doctor said. "His levels are critically low. We are prepping a unit from the blood bank now, but given his rare antibody profile, it would be safer to have a direct donor match from a close relative if possible. It reduces the risk of rejection." Thomas's eyes lit up. It was a look of terrifying fanaticism. He saw this as his moment. He saw this as divine intervention. He had lost his money, his house, and his car, but he still had the one thing he believed made him superior to everyone else on earth: his blood. "Take mine," Thomas screamed. He began to roll up the sleeve of his dirty dress shirt. "Sir, we need to test for compatibility first," the doctor said. Compatibility. Thomas laughed maniacally. He thrust his arm toward the doctor. You don't understand. I am Thomas Sterling. That boy is my flesh and blood. He is the direct descendant of the founders of this state. He looked at me, a sneer forming on his face. You wanted to erase me, Ethan. Thomas spat. You wanted to buy my life, but you can't buy this. You can't buy biology. This is the Sterling bloodline. It is pure. It is royal. It is the only thing that will save him. He turned back to the doctor. Hook me up. Put the needle right here. Pump my blood into him. It will make him stronger. It is the blood of kings, not peasants. Preston looked up, wiping his nose. Yeah, Dad is right. We have the same blood type. We are O negative. The universal donors. The best. The doctor looked skeptical, but he signaled to a nurse. Get a type and cross on the grandfather, the doctor ordered. Stat. If he is a match, we will do a direct transfer. Thomas sat down in the phlebotomy chair like he was ascending a throne. He held his arm out proudly. He watched the nurse insert the needle. He watched the dark red vial fill up. See that, Thomas whispered, looking at the vial? That is liquid gold. That is history. That is what separates us from the help. He looked at me standing in the doorway. You can take my money, Ethan Thomas said, but you will never have this. You are an outsider. You always were. Connor is the true heir, and today I am going to save him with the very essence of who we are. I said nothing. I just watched. I knew something Thomas didn't. I knew that biology is a funny thing. It doesn't care about narratives. It doesn't care about egos. It only cares about protein markers and antigens. 10 minutes passed. The tension in the hallway was thick enough to choke on. Thomas was practically glowing with self-importance. He was ready to be the hero. He was ready to hold this over Connor's head for the rest of his life. I saved you. My blood runs in your veins. The doctor returned. He was holding a clipboard. He was not smiling. He walked past the nurses. He walked past Preston. He stopped in front of Thomas. Mr. Sterling, the doctor said. Ready when you are. Doc. Thomas said, clenching his fist to pump the vein. Let it flow. The doctor shook his head. I am afraid we cannot use your blood, sir. Thomas froze. What? Why? Is it my cholesterol? I told you I am healthy as a horse. It is not your health, the doctor said. He looked at the clipboard, then at Preston, then back at Thomas. There seems to be a mismatch, the doctor said slowly. Mismatch, Thomas repeated. That is impossible. I am his grandfather. He is my son's son. We are Sterlings. The doctor took a deep breath. He had delivered bad news before, but he clearly sensed the volatility of this family. Sir, the patient Connor has blood type AB positive. So Thomas demanded. Your son Preston is type O negative, the doctor continued. And you are type O negative. Thomas blinked. He looked at Preston. He looked at the doctor. He tried to do the biological math in his head, but his arrogance was blocking the signal. I don't understand, Thomas said angrily. So what? Just give him the blood. The doctor lowered the clipboard. Mr. Sterling, it is genetically impossible for a father with type O blood to produce a child with type AB blood. The silence that followed was louder than the scream had been. Preston stood up. What are you saying? I am saying, the doctor said, his voice clinical and cold, that based on these markers, there is zero probability that you are the biological father of that child. Thomas sat there, the needle still in his arm, the vial of his royal blood sitting on the tray next to him. He looked at the vial. Then he looked at the grandson lying behind the curtain. The blood he had been so proud of, the blood he had worshipped, the blood he had used as a weapon to demean my daughter. It wasn't there. The Sterling line had ended with Preston. And the boy they had cherished, the boy they had put on a pedestal while kicking my daughter to the floor, was a stranger. I stepped forward from the doorway. It seems I said, my voice cutting through the silence, that the only thing you have left to brag about just turned out to be a lie. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room hallway hummed with a low electric buzz that seemed to amplify the silence following the doctor's pronouncement. It is genetically impossible, he had said. Those 4 words were currently rewriting the entire history of the Sterling family. My father, Thomas, stood frozen. The needle was still in his arm, the dark red vial of his blood sitting on the stainless steel tray like a rejected offering. He looked at the vial, then at the doctor, then at Preston. His brain, usually so quick to find an angle or a loophole, was stalling. He was trying to negotiate with biology, but biology was not interested in a settlement. "Check it again," Thomas whispered. His voice was trembling. "The lab made a mistake. They mixed up the samples. It happens all the time. I saw a report on the news. You need to fire the lab technician." The doctor did not blink. He did not look at his clipboard. He looked Thomas straight in the eye with the exhausted patience of a man who deals with life and death every day and has no time for delusions. "Mr. Sterling," the doctor said calmly, "we ran the test Ferriton 3 times. We used 2 different machines. We also did a manual cross-match. There is no mistake. Your blood type is O negative. Your son's blood type is O negative. The patient Connor is AB positive. In order for a child to be AB positive, at least one parent must carry the B antigen. Neither you nor your son possess that genetic marker. It is not just unlikely, it is impossible." Thomas pulled the needle out of his arm. He didn't wait for the nurse to apply a bandage. A drop of blood ran down his forearm, staining his expensive cuff, but he didn't notice. Preston Thomas barked, turning on his son. Tell him he is crazy. Tell him Shelby is a good woman. Tell him Connor is a sterling." Preston was leaning against the wall, sliding down slowly until he hit the floor. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. He wasn't arguing. He wasn't screaming. He was staring at the opposite wall with a 1,000-yard stare. Preston Thomas shouted, kicking his son's shoe. "Say something." Preston looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed with the exhaustion of the past week and the horror of the present moment. "He had blue eyes," Preston whispered. What Thomas snapped. "Connor," Preston said, his voice cracking. "When he was born, he had bright blue eyes. Shelby said it was a recessive gene from her grandmother. But we don't have blue eyes, Dad. You have brown eyes. Mom had brown eyes. I have brown eyes." Thomas froze. I stood in the doorway watching the house of cards collapse. It was time. I stepped into the room. I was carrying a thick manila envelope under my arm. It was not a medical file. It was a dossier I had compiled 3 days ago as part of my due diligence on the family assets. When you buy a company, you audit the books. When you buy a family's debt, you audit their lives. I walked over to the rolling table and placed the envelope next to the vial of blood. "The doctor is right," I said. Thomas spun around. "You!" he hissed. "You did this. You paid the doctor to lie. This is part of your sick game to humiliate us." I ignored him. I looked at Preston, who was still sitting on the floor. "Get up, Preston," I said. He didn't move. I said, "Get up," I commanded. My voice was sharp, authoritative. It was the voice of the man who owned their mortgage. Preston scrambled to his feet, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. I opened the envelope. I pulled out a stack of papers stapled together and flagged with yellow sticky notes. "I didn't pay the doctor," I said, flipping through the pages, "but I did pay a private investigator named Wallace. He used to be FBI. He is very expensive, but he is very thorough." I held up the first document. It was a photograph. It was grainy, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, but the faces were clear. It showed Preston's wife Shelby sitting at an outdoor cafe in the Hamptons. She was laughing, her hand resting intimately on the arm of a man who was definitely not Preston. The man was tall, blonde, and athletic. "Who is that?" Thomas asked, squinting at the photo. "That I said is Marco. He was the head tennis pro at the country club you guys belonged to in 2015. You remember Marco, don't you, Preston? You used to tip him $100 a week to fix your backhand." Preston went pale. "Marco," he whispered. I pulled out the next document. It was a bank statement. "This is a transaction record from Shelby's personal account," I said. "August 2015. 3 months before she announced she was pregnant with Connor." I pointed to a highlighted line. "Transfer of $10,000, I read. Recipient, Marco V. Subject line, consulting." I flipped the page. September 2015. Another 10,000. October 2015. 15,000. I looked at Preston. "She wasn't paying for tennis lessons, Preston. She was paying for silence. Marco moved back to Argentina in November. 2 weeks later, Shelby told you she was pregnant with your miracle baby." "No," Preston moaned. He grabbed his hair, pulling at it. "No, that is not true. She loves me. She said I was the only one." I pulled out the final document. It was a copy of a birth certificate. Not the one they had framed in the nursery, but the original application filed with the state registry. "Look at the signature on the witness line," I said, shoving the paper into Preston's chest. He took it. His hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. He looked at the line. Witness Marco Valerioso. Preston dropped the paper. He made a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a retch. He turned to the sink in the corner of the trauma room and threw up. Thomas stood there staring at the photo of the tennis pro, the man who had fathered his grandson, the man whose blood was currently running through the veins of the boy Thomas had idolized. Thomas looked at the doctor. "Is there any chance?" Thomas asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Any chance at all that this is a coincidence?" The doctor shook his head. "Mr. Sterling, the blood type match is definitive. The boy is not biologically related to your son." "I am sorry." Thomas looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw my father look truly old. The fire was gone. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a man who had walked into a casino, bet his entire life savings on red, and watched the ball land on black. "You knew," Thomas whispered. I nodded. I suspected. The financial audit flagged the payments to Marco. The dates aligned. But I didn't say anything because I didn't want to hurt the boy. Connor is innocent in this. He is just a kid. I took a step closer to my father. "But you," I said, "you are not innocent." I pointed at the curtain where Connor lay unconscious. "You spent 8 years worshipping that boy," I said. "You gave him the best seat at the table. You gave him the trust fund. You gave him your love. Why? Because you thought he carried your magic DNA. You thought he was a continuation of you." I paused, letting the words sink in. "And on Christmas Eve, you looked at my daughter. You looked at Maya, a girl who actually loves you, a girl who drew you pictures and wanted to sit next to you. And you pushed her onto the floor. You called her a mongrel. You said she wasn't family because she didn't have your blood." I laughed. It was a dry, bitter sound. "Well, guess what, Dad? Neither does Connor." Thomas flinched as if I had slapped him. "You pushed away the child who loved you for a child who is biologically a stranger," I continued. "You bet everything on a lie, and now you have nothing. No legacy, no heir, no bloodline." Preston wiped his mouth and turned around. He looked at Thomas. "You made me do it," Preston said. His voice was venomous. "What?" Thomas asked, confused. "You put so much pressure on us," Preston screamed. "You told Shelby that if she didn't give you a grandson, you would cut us out of the will. You told her she was useless if she couldn't produce an heir. She was terrified of you. We were all terrified of you." Preston jabbed a finger at his father. "She cheated because you made our marriage a breeding program. You wanted a trophy, not a family. Well, congratulations, Dad. You bought a fake trophy." "Stop it," Thomas yelled, covering his ears. "Stop it." "I am not stopping," Preston cried. "I raised another man's son for 8 years because I was afraid of you. I let you treat Ethan like garbage because I wanted your money. And now look at us. We are in a motel. My wife is a cheater. My son isn't my son. And the only person who has any power left is the one we kicked out." Preston looked at me. There was no hate in his eyes anymore. Only defeat. "Ethan," he said, "help me. I don't know what to do." "Shelby, she's at the motel waiting for me. What do I tell her?" I looked at my watch. "You don't tell her anything," I said. I pulled my phone out. "I just authorized the hospital to proceed with the transfusion using the blood bank supply," I said. "I will cover the cost. Connor will be fine. He will wake up in an hour." I looked at Preston. "When he wakes up, you are going to be a father," I said sternly. "You are going to hold his hand. You are going to tell him you love him, because that boy is the only victim here. He didn't ask to be born into this mess. If you walk out on him now because of his DNA, you are no better than Thomas." Preston nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I will. I love him. He is my son. I don't care about the blood." "Good," I said. I turned to Thomas. He was staring at the floor, broken. "But you, Dad," I said. "You don't get off that easy." I picked up the envelope with the receipts. "I am keeping this file," I said, "and I am adding it to the public record of the bankruptcy proceedings. The court needs to know why the family trust was drained of hush money." Thomas looked up. "You wouldn't. It will destroy our reputation." "The scandal." "Your reputation," I interrupted. "You don't have a reputation. You have a tab. And I am closing it." I walked to the door. I stopped and looked back at the doctor. "Doctor, do whatever is necessary for the boy. Send the bill to Vanguard Capital." The doctor nodded respectfully. "Yes, Mr. Sterling." I looked at my father one last time. "You wanted a pure bloodline. Dad, now you have it. It is just you, sitting in a room, all alone." I walked out of the ER. The air outside was cold, but it felt clean. I took a deep breath. The dismantling of the Sterling myth was complete. They had no money, they had no home, and now they had no name. I got into my car and dialed Vanessa. "It is done," I said. "Is Connor okay?" she asked immediately. "He will be," I said. "But the dynasty is dead." I drove away from the hospital, leaving them to drown in the truth they had created. The silence in the trauma room was broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor attached to the boy who was no longer an heir. My father sat in the corner on a hard plastic chair. He was staring at his hands, the hands that had built a fake empire, the hands that had pushed my daughter. I watched the realization hit him in waves. It was a physical transformation. His shoulders slumped, his face turned gray. For the first time in 80 years, Thomas Sterling was forced to look at the truth without a filter. He was replaying the tape of Christmas Eve in his mind. I could see it in his eyes. He was remembering Maya walking up to him. He was remembering her small voice asking to sit next to him. She had looked at him with pure, unadulterated love. She didn't know he was broke. She didn't know he was a narcissist. She just loved him because he was her grandfather, and he had rejected her. He had called her a mongrel. He had physically assaulted her to protect a chair for Connor. And now looking at the unconscious boy in the bed, Thomas realized the cosmic joke. Maya, the child he had discarded, was the one who carried the spirit of the family. She was smart. She was resilient. She was kind. She was everything he claimed a Sterling should be. Connor, the boy he had worshipped, was a stranger, a genetic tourist. Thomas let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "I pushed the wrong one," Thomas whispered. His voice was raspy. "I pushed the only one who actually loved me." Preston didn't hear him. Preston was staring at the door. He heard the click of heels on the linoleum floor. Shelby walked in. My sister-in-law looked pristine. She was wearing white tennis gear and a visor, looking like she had just come from a country club lunch. She didn't look like a mother whose child was in the emergency room. She looked annoyed. "What is taking so long?" Shelby snapped, not even looking at Connor. The front desk said he fell. "Is he okay? I have a spa appointment at 4. Preston stood up slowly. He was holding the birth certificate I had given him. He was holding the photo of Marco, the tennis pro. Shelby stopped. She saw the look on Preston's face. She saw Thomas slumped in the corner. She saw me standing by the window. "What?" Shelby asked. "Why are you all looking at me like that?" Preston walked up to her. He didn't yell. He held up the photo of Marco. "How is your backhand?" Shelby Preston asked. Shelby froze. Her eyes darted to the photo, then to Preston. She didn't cry. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She did exactly what a person caught in a lie does when they have no defense. She went on the attack. "Where did you get that?" she hissed. "It doesn't matter," Preston said. "The doctor just tried to match my blood with Connor's. We are not a match, Shelby. We will never be a match." Shelby looked at the DNA report in his other hand. She realized the game was over. She dropped the act of the concerned mother. She crossed her arms and let out a sigh of bored irritation. "So what?" Shelby said. So what? Preston screamed. He threw the papers in her face. "You lied to me for 8 years. You let me raise another man's son. You let me beg my father for money to pay for his school, his clothes, his life." Shelby laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that echoed off the tiled walls. "Oh, grow up, Preston. You should be thanking me. Thanking you." Preston stammered. "Yes," Shelby said. She stepped closer to him, poking him in the chest with a manicured finger. "Look at you. You are weak. You are pathetic. You can't even pay your own gambling debts without your brother saving you. You think you could have given me a son like Connor?" She pointed at the boy in the bed. "Connor is strong. Connor is athletic. Connor is beautiful. He gets that from Marco. If he had your genes, he would be a balding, spineless loser just like you. I gave this family the heir you wanted. I gave Thomas the perfect grandson to brag about. I did the job you couldn't do." Thomas stood up. He was shaking. You harlot," Thomas sputtered. "You defiled my house." Shelby turned on him. "Your house? You mean the house the bank just took? Don't talk to me about defiling Thomas. You created this. You told me on my wedding day that my only job was to produce a male heir. You told me that if I didn't give you a grandson, I was worthless. Well, I gave you one. It is not my fault your son shoots blanks." She looked around the room with disgust. "I am leaving," Shelby announced. "I am going to pack my bags, and I am taking Connor as soon as he wakes up. I am not going to let him grow up in a motel with 2 bankrupt failures." She turned to Preston. "Marco is back in town, by the way. He opened a gym in Jersey, At least he can pay for dinner without calling his daddy. She spun around and walked out. The door swung shut behind her. Preston collapsed against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. He buried his face in his hands and wept. It was the sound of a man who had been stripped of his last shred of dignity. Thomas stood in the center of the room. He was breathing hard. His face was turning a deep, alarming shade of purple. He looked at Preston crying on the floor. He looked at the empty doorway where Shelby had just eviscerated his legacy. He looked at me. Ethan Thomas gasped. He reached out a hand toward me. I didn't take it. I stood perfectly still. Ethan! The chair, Thomas wheezed. His hand moved to his chest. He clutched the fabric of his dirty dress shirt. It hurts. He wasn't faking. I could see the sweat popping out on his forehead. I could see the terror in his eyes. It was an angina attack brought on by the massive spike in the blood pressure from the stress. His heart, which he had always claimed was made of iron, was failing him. My blood, Thomas choked out. My royal blood. He fell. He didn't fall gracefully like in the movies. He crumbled. His knees gave out, and he hit the linoleum face first. Dad Preston screamed, crawling toward him. Nurses rushed in from the hallway. Code Blue, one of them shouted. We need a crash cart in trauma too. They swarmed around Thomas. They rolled him onto his back. His eyes were open, staring up at the fluorescent lights, full of panic. I watched the scene with the detachment of an auditor reviewing a failed company. I watched them rip open his shirt. I watched them attach the defibrillator pads. Clara Doctor shouted. His body jerked. I looked at his face. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel joy. I felt a sense of completion. This was a man who had spent his life believing he was genetically superior to everyone else. He believed his blood made him immortal. He believed his name was a shield. But lying there on the dirty hospital floor with his shirt torn open and strangers pounding on his chest, he looked exactly like what he was. A mortal man who had run out of credit. I checked my watch. I had a meeting with the board of directors in an hour to finalize the takeover of his company. I turned around and walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard the doctor charge the pedals again. Clear, I didn't look back. The Sterling legacy was flatlining, and I had a new empire to build. Dưới đây là nội dung chi tiết cho Scene 13, được viết hoàn toàn bằng tiếng Anh, theo đúng văn phòng, ban yêu cầu lạnh lùng, sử dụng nhiều thuật ngữ tài chính gạch chéo pháp lý, tập trung vào sự trừng phạt thích đáng. Thomas Sterling checked himself out of St. Jude's Hospital exactly 3 hours after his heart stopped beating. The doctors told him it was suicide. They told him his arteries were 80% blocked and that stress was a loaded gun pointed at his chest. They told him he needed bed rest medication and peace. Thomas ignored them all. To him, the hospital was a prison for weak men. He was not weak. He was a Sterling. And Sterlings did not die in rented hospital gowns. They died in their boots fighting for their kingdom. He took a cab to the office because his car was gone. He wore the same suit from the emergency room, now wrinkled and stained with sweat, though he had tried to clean it in the hospital bathroom. He told himself he looked rugged. In reality, he looked like a ghost haunting his own life. He arrived at the Sterling Holdings Tower at 9 a.m. The first thing he noticed was the noise in the lobby. Usually, the lobby was a hushed cathedral of commerce. Today, it sounded like a construction site. Thomas limped through the revolving doors. He stopped dead in his tracks. 2 men on ladders were working on the massive marble wall behind the reception desk. For 30 years, that wall had borne the silver letters of his name, Sterling Holdings. Now the letters were gone. Only the faint discolored outlines remained on the stone like scars. The workmen were drilling holes to mount a new sign. A sleek modern logo made of brushed titanium was sitting on the floor waiting to be raised. It read, Vanguard Capital. Thomas felt a sharp pain in his chest, but he swallowed it down. He marched up to the reception desk. Sheila was there typing furiously. She was wearing a new ID badge. It was blue. Vanguard Blue. Sheila Thomas barked. His voice was raspy, lacking its usual boom. What is the meaning of this? Why are they defacing my wall? Get security down here immediately. Sheila stopped typing. She looked up. She didn't jump to attention. She didn't look terrified. She looked at him with a mixture of pity and administrative detachedness. Mr. Sterling, Sheila said, you are not supposed to be here. Your access pass was deactivated yesterday at 5 p.m. Deactivated? Thomas sputtered. I own this building. I own you. Now call security. I cannot do that. Sheila said calmly. I report to the transition team now, and they have given strict instructions that all former executives must have an appointment. Former, Thomas whispered. He didn't wait for an answer. He pushed past the turnstiles. The alarm blared, beep, 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 a shrill rejection of his presence. He ignored it. He ignored the security guard who started to jog toward him. Thomas got into the elevator and slammed the button for the 42nd floor. He needed to get to the boardroom. He needed to sit at the head of the table. If he sat in the chair, he was still the boss. It was the logic of a madman, but it was all he had left. The elevator ride felt like an eternity. When the doors opened, the executive floor was eerily quiet. The panic from the previous week was gone. The weeping employees were gone. In their place were strangers. Men and women in sharp suits moving with purpose, carrying tablets and files branded with the Vanguard logo. They were efficient. They were young. They were the new army. Thomas walked down the hallway to the main conference room. The double doors were closed. He could hear voices inside. He didn't knock. He threw the doors open with the last ounce of strength he possessed. "This is my company," Thomas screamed as he stumbled into the room. "And I am not leaving." The room went silent. The long mahogany table was full. 12 people sat around it. They were not his old sycophants. These were the sharks of Wall Street, the auditors, the lawyers, the fixers. And at the head of the table, sitting in the high-backed leather chair that Thomas had custom-ordered from Italy, sat Ethan. My son looked different. He wasn't wearing the jumpsuit anymore. He was wearing a charcoal grey suit that screamed authority. His posture was relaxed, confident. He didn't jump when Thomas burst in. He didn't look surprised. He simply stopped speaking, capped his fountain pen, and looked at his father. To Ethan's right sat Vanessa. She had a stack of files in front of her. She looked at Thomas over the rim of her reading glasses. Her expression was clinical. She wasn't a daughter-in-law today. She was general counsel. Ethan Thomas gasped, holding onto the doorframe for support. "Get up, you are in my seat." Ethan leaned back. The leather creaked. "Correction," Ethan said coolly. "I am in the chairman's seat, and since you are no longer the chairman, you are standing in the wrong room." Thomas stumbled forward. He grabbed the back of an empty chair. "You can't do this," Thomas said. "I am the founder. I built this. You cannot just steal it because you bought some debt. I have rights. I have bylaws." Vanessa cleared her throat. She opened the thickest file on the table. "Actually, Mr. Sterling," Vanessa said, her voice sharp and precise. "We are not relying on the debt acquisition alone. That simply gave us leverage. Your removal is based on the findings of the forensic audit conducted over the last 48 hours. "Audit," Thomas said. "What audit?" "The one you authorized," Ethan said. "When you hired the new janitor, you signed a contract granting full access to all records." "We found everything, Dad." Vanessa pulled a sheet of paper from the file. "Item 1, Vanessa read, embezzlement of corporate funds. On December 31st, you wired $100,000 from the Employee Pension Fund to a shell entity to purchase tickets for the Metropolitan Gala. That is a federal crime, Mr. Sterling. It is theft. I was going to pay it back." Thomas stammered. "It was a loan. It was unauthorized," Vanessa countered. "Item 2, fraudulent accounting. You have been inflating the value of your real estate assets by 40% to secure loans from banks. That is bank fraud." She flipped another page. Item 3, she continued, looking him dead in the eye. "Gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. You used company assets to pay for personal silence, specifically the hush money payments to cover up your son's marital indiscretions." Thomas looked around the room. The board members were writing notes. No one was looking at him with sympathy. They were looking at him like a cancer that had finally been cut out. "This is a witch hunt," Thomas yelled. His chest was hurting again, a dull throb that radiated down his left arm. "You are doing this because you hate me. You are doing this because I didn't let your brat sit at the table." Ethan stood up. He didn't slam his hand on the table. He stood up slowly, buttoning his jacket. The movement commanded total silence. "I am doing this," Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous, "because you are incompetent." He walked around the table until he was standing face to face with his father. "You ran this company into the ground, Dad. You treated it like your personal piggy bank. You treated your employees like dirt, and you treated your family like assets to be liquidated." Ethan gestured to the window to the city below. "Vanguard Capital officially owns 51% of Sterling Holdings as of 8 o'clock a.m. this morning." Ethan said. We executed a hostile takeover. The board has already voted. The motion passed unanimously. What motion? Thomas whispered. The motion to terminate you for cause, Ethan said. He picked up a document from the table and held it out to Thomas. You are fired, Dad. Effective immediately. You have 0 severance. You have 0 stock options remaining as they were seized to pay restitution to the pension fund you stole from. Thomas looked at the paper. Termination notice. The words swam before his eyes. Fired. Thomas repeated. You can't fire me. I am Thomas Sterling. Ethan shook his head. Thomas Sterling is just a name, he said. And right now it is a name with a credit score of 400 and a pending indictment from the district attorney. Indictment? Thomas gasped. Vanessa stood up. Yes, she said. Based on the evidence of embezzlement, we were legally obligated to report our findings to the authorities. The police are waiting in the lobby, Thomas. We didn't want them to arrest you in the boardroom out of respect for the other members, but since you broke in... Thomas backed away. He looked at the door. He looked at the window. He looked at the son he had called a failure. You are sending me to jail? Thomas asked. His voice was small, broken. I am your father. Ethan looked at him. There was no joy in his eyes, only a cold, hard resolve. You should have thought about that before you shoved a 7-year-old girl, Ethan said. Ethan pressed a button on the intercom. Security, send them in. The doors opened behind Thomas. 2 police officers stepped in. They weren't the private security guards Thomas was used to bullying. These were NYPD officers. They had handcuffs. Mr. Sterling, one of the officers said, we have a warrant for your arrest regarding wire fraud and embezzlement. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back. Thomas looked at Ethan. He pleaded with his eyes. He begged for a reprieve, for a miracle, for a check he could write to make this go away. But Ethan had already turned around. He walked back to the head of the table. He sat down in the leather chair. He swiveled it so his back was to his father. Get him out of here, Ethan said to the empty room. We have work to do. Thomas felt the cold steel of the handcuffs click onto his wrists. The sound was final. It was the period at the end of a very long, very loud sentence. As the officers marched him out, Thomas looked back one last time. He saw his son sitting in his chair reviewing a file discussing the future of the company with the woman Thomas had tried to crush. They didn't look up as he was dragged into the hallway. The door closed. Ethan waited until the click of the latch echoed through the room. Then he looked at Vanessa. Agenda item number 1. Ethan said, his voice steady. Rebranding, Vanessa replied. Ethan nodded. Let's erase the past, he said, and build something that actually has value. He picked up his pen and signed the first order of business as the new chairman. The signature was clean, sharp, and undeniable. The Sterling era was over. The Vanguard era had begun. The revolving doors of the Sterling Tower spun one last time for Thomas Sterling. But this time, he did not push them open with the aggressive confidence of a man who owned the building. He was pushed through them by the momentum of 2 security guards named Frank and Jose. I watched the feed from the lobby security camera on my tablet. I knew Frank and Jose. I knew that Frank had a daughter with asthma, and Jose was working 2 jobs to pay for his wife's nursing degree. I knew this because I asked. My father, on the other hand, had walked past them for 15 years without ever learning their names. To him, they were furniture in uniforms, now that furniture was escorting him out of his own life. Frank released my father's arm as they reached the sidewalk. It was not a violent shove, but it was firm. It was the kind of dismissal reserved for drunk patrons or trespassers. Please, stay off the premises, Mr. Sterling, Frank said. His voice was polite, but final. If you return, we will be forced to call the precinct again. And next time, they won't just issue a warning. Thomas stood on the concrete. He was shivering. He had left his cashmere overcoat in the executive suite, but no one had offered to retrieve it for him. He was wearing only his wrinkled suit jacket stained with sweat from his earlier arrest, and the subsequent release pending arraignment. The wind on Fifth Avenue was 28 degrees. It cut through his cotton shirt like a knife. He looked back at the glass doors. He saw the employees in the lobby. They were not looking down at their phones. They were looking at him. Some were taking photos. The king of New York standing on the curb like a vagrant. My father patted his pockets. He was looking for his wallet. He found it. He opened it with trembling hands. It was empty. The police had returned his personal effects, but the contents of his wallet had been decimated by the freeze orders I had executed. His black card cancelled. His corporate expense card revoked. He had $40 in cash. That was his net worth. He pulled out his phone. It was the only lifeline he had left. I watched the data stream on my monitor as he tried to access his banking app. Login attempt 1 failed. Login attempt 2 failed. System message, user access revoked. Contact branch administrator. He tried his investment portfolio. System message, account suspended. Federal Asset Seizure Protocol Alpha 9. He tried his email. System message, password incorrect. He was digitally erasing in real time. He stood there, tapping the screen frantically, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. He looked like a man trying to bail water out of the Titanic with a teaspoon. Then a notification popped up on his screen. I had set it to deliver at exactly this moment. It was a push notification from the smart security system of his mansion in Connecticut. Alert perimeter sealed. Locks changed. Sheriff's Department notice posted. Thomas stared at the screen. He read the words. His home, the sanctuary, where he had judged the world, was now a government asset. He couldn't go back. He couldn't sleep in his own bed. He couldn't even retrieve his toothbrush. He looked up at the sky. He looked around at the busy street. People were walking past him, rushing to meetings, rushing to buy coffee. They didn't know who he was. To them, he was just another old man in a suit having a bad day. The anonymity was more painful than the cold. He needed a savior. He needed someone to blame. He needed his son. I saw him dial my number. I was sitting in the chairman's office 42 floors above him. The room was quiet. The view was spectacular. My phone began to vibrate on the mahogany desk. Caller ID, Dad. Vanessa looked up from her paperwork. She saw the name on the screen. She didn't say anything. She just raised an eyebrow. I picked up the phone. I didn't say hello. I didn't say goodbye. I just pressed the answer button and held the device up to the air. Ethan. My father's voice cracked through the speaker. It was desperate, high-pitched, stripped of all dignity. Ethan, please. I am outside. It is freezing. I have nowhere to go. They took the house. They took everything. You made your point. Okay, you won. Now send a car. Send some money. I am your father. You can't leave me on the street. I said nothing. I looked across the room. Sitting on the leather sofa was my daughter Maya. She was playing with a new set of architectural blocks I had bought her. She was building a tower. It was tall, sturdy, and colorful. She placed the final block on top. It held. Maya clapped her hands. She threw her head back and let out a laugh. It was a pure, crystalline sound of absolute joy. It was the sound of a child who felt safe. It was the sound of a child who knew she was loved, not for her blood, but for her soul. Daddy, look, she giggled. I built a castle. And this one doesn't fall down. I held the phone closer to her. Ethan, my father screamed from the cold sidewalk. Answer me, who is that? Is that her? Maya laughed again, oblivious to the ghost on the other end of the line. I love it, sweetie, I said to her, my voice warm and gentle. It is perfect. Ethan. My father wailed. I pulled the phone back to my ear. I listened to his heavy breathing for 1 second. I listened to the sound of the wind on Fifth Avenue. I didn't give him a lecture. I didn't give him a final insult. I gave him the only thing he deserved, the sound of a happy family that didn't need him. I ended the call. I blocked the number. I looked down at the street from the window. I saw a small figure on the sidewalk lower his phone. He stood there for a moment frozen. Then he turned and began to walk. He didn't walk toward a hotel. He didn't walk toward a bank. He just walked away, disappearing into the crowd of millions. A man who had traded everything for a legacy that never existed, leaving behind nothing but an empty space where a father should have been. I turned back to Maya. Come here, architect, I said. Let's build another one. She ran into my arms, and 42 floors below, Thomas Sterling vanished into the gray winter of New York finally and completely alone. It has been exactly 365 days since I drove my weeping daughter away from the Sterling estate in Connecticut. A lot can change in a year. Stocks rise, empires fall, and tables turn. Tonight, we are hosting Christmas Eve dinner at our new penthouse overlooking Central Park. The table is made of reclaimed walnut imported from Italy. It seats 16 people. And tonight, every single chair is filled. There are no empty seats. There are no missing place settings. And there is certainly no one being told to sit in the kitchen. I looked around the room as Vanessa brought out the roast. She was laughing with Jason, my lawyer, who had just closed the final merger deal for the new Vanguard Sterling Group. Sitting next to him was the doctor from the emergency room who had become a close family friend after saving Connor. And then there was Maya. She was 8 years old now. She was sitting at the head of the table. In my father's house, the head of the table was reserved for the patriarch, a throne of fear and intimidation. In my house, the head of the table is for the person with the biggest heart. Maya was wearing a paper crown from a Christmas cracker, looking like the queen she was born to be. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out under the table. It was a text message from Preston. Message read, "Merry Christmas, Ethan. I am with Connor. We are having pizza. He is happy. Thank you for the job. I won't be late on Monday." I smiled. Preston was currently working as a shift supervisor in the logistics warehouse of the company I now owned. He was making $25 an hour. It wasn't a fortune, but it was honest money. He was paying his own rent. He was seeing his son every weekend. He had lost his inheritance, but he had found his spine. There was no text from Thomas. My father was currently living in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens, waiting for his trial on 3 counts of wire fraud. His passport had been surrendered. His social circle had evaporated the moment his net worth hit 0. He was spending Christmas alone staring at a television, probably telling anyone who would listen that he used to be the king of New York. He was a man who had chosen blood over love, and now he had neither. Daddy Maya called out, tapping her fork on her glass. I looked up. "Yes, sweetie. Are we going to make a toast?" she asked. I stood up. The room went silent. I looked at the faces around me. These were people who had stood by me when I was a freelance consultant. These were people who judged me by my character, not my bank account. I raised my glass. "To family," I said. "To family," everyone echoed. I took a sip of wine and sat back down. Vanessa reached over and squeezed my hand. "You know," she whispered. "You never told me what you did with the old house." I looked at her. "I sold it," I said. "Really?" she asked. "To who?" "I donated it," I corrected myself. "I transferred the deed to a non-profit organization this morning." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" "The Connecticut Home for At-Risk Youth," I said. "It is a shelter for children who have been rejected by their families." Vanessa smiled. Her eyes filled with tears. "So Thomas Sterling's legacy," she said, "is now a safe haven for the people he despised." "Exactly," I said. I thought it was poetic. I looked back at Maya. She was busy explaining to the doctor how she had built a Lego tower that reached the ceiling. She was safe. She was confident. She would never again wonder if she was good enough to sit at the table. That is the lesson I learned this year. It is a lesson that cost $12 million and a lifetime of pain to learn, but it was worth every penny. Family is not a gene sequence. Family is not a last name. Family is not determined by whose blood runs in your veins or who appears on a birth certificate. Family are the people who pick you up when you fall down the stairs. Family are the people who give you a seat when the world tries to make you stand. Family are the people who stay when the credit cards are declined and the cars are towed away. My father thought his blood made him royalty. He was wrong. His actions made him a pauper. I looked at the snow falling outside the window. It was the same snow that had fallen last year, cold and indifferent, but inside it was warm. I am Ethan Sterling. I am a husband. I am a father. And I am the man who rewrote the definition of worth. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you have ever been underestimated by your own family, or if you have ever had to build your own table because no one gave you a seat, leave a comment below. I want to hear your story. And remember, the best revenge isn't anger. The best revenge is living a life so full, so successful, and so happy that the people who hurt you become nothing more than a footnote in your biography. Merry Christmas, and thanks for watching.